Welcome everyone. Episode 44 on a busy week. A lot going on this week. If you haven't noticed by any if you're on Facebook or if you know, or if you're on any social media, if you haven't noticed, we're one day away from the Marine Corps birthday. That's so, and then, we got Veterans Day in a couple days, and then we got a PWP podcast. We got a lot going on. So, if you haven't been paying attention, I'm bringing Mr. Mike Kelvington back. Part 2, episode 31 originally, right?
Yeah, 31 now, 44.
Yeah, we both re-listened to it today. The first podcast I've ever re-listened to, and I took account. We were seeing who said the most, and Mike won that. By the way,
100%.
No, but we had a really good conversation. Was it May?
Yeah,
May this year. Really long career. We'll get into it as we move around. That's 1 for me, by the way. Or 2 maybe. On this one, 3. But we'll get it now. No, that's all I can think of to do. But we'll get into a quick. We'll do a synopsis first about catch up everybody. Okay. If you want to listen to episode 31, if you haven't, you absolutely should. After tonight, you'll see that what Mike had to say in May. It's just a continued conversation, and that's why we brought him back in. It's some really relevant things that I think we can talk about. So, welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Great to be back. Yeah, thanks.
Glad to have you. So we'll start off with our quote as we start every episode. This is from General Norman Schwarzkopf. It doesn't take a hero to order men into battle. It takes a hero to be the one of those men who goes into battle. So you look at that. That's and I'm sitting across from a guy who has seen many battles in his life. We'll talk real quick about bringing everybody up to speed. So Mike is the professor of military science at The Ohio State University. How long have you been there now?
Just over 2 years. This is my 5th semester.
Okay.
Yeah, almost 2.5 now. Time flies.
What's that?
Time flies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's moving. Yeah, I feel like you would just It's you look at the pictures. A lot of stuff on your profile. It's lots to happen. Yeah. Busy too. You're supposed to be relaxing a little bit.
Yeah, it's great though. It's this is Super Bowl week for us, as some would call it. So a lot of activities going on, but obviously righteous in the sense that we're honoring the veterans of our country that have been willing to serve, and I think it's paramount, and it's something that the cadets are really willing to lean into. So it's definitely much appreciated. Yeah,
it's nuts because you posted a post before you came over about what the cadets have been doing this week, and I'm like, I don't remember ever doing. We were in the military colleges, so it's different, but I don't remember maybe it is normal now that there's so much involvement from LTC. Is that normal, or is that something that you've imposed as you've been on board?
I think part of it is just making sure that we're leaning into community outreach as our third line of effort. That's something that we've developed in the program, but also there's a lot going on in Columbus, and there's a lot of demand signal for anything Ohio State, and that includes the Department of Military Science. And especially for this week, all the stuff that's going on, lots of great opportunities for us to be participants in things that honor our veterans, and it's also great exposure for our cadets, whether it's on campus, off campus.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that because I think there was one thing I want to talk to you about as we get along about that.
Sure.
And Veterans Day. Just to catch everybody up. So Mike, that's his current assignment now. We could probably talk another 2 hours and 15 minutes to catch up to what we talked about before. But Mike's a former conventional infantry officer, also in the Ranger Regiment. Spent a lot of time in the Ranger Regiments, 2nd Battalion, Special Troops Battalion, and 1st Battalion, right? We've been all 3, right? I got that right?
And then the headquarters.
Right. So he's spent a lot of time in the Ranger Regiment, and we're hoping to talk more about that this time because we didn't do that. But the last episode, to catch you guys up is, Mike talked very extensively up to about his company commander time, and shared some a very deep conversation. It was great to go back and listen to it, and what you've been through it was really special to hear it, to be part of it the first time, and then hear it again. And maybe I need to go back and listen to other episodes. That's what I learned this week. It's good because it's crazy because you're sitting right here with you the whole time, and some of those things you remember, and then some things you don't. And you're like,
it's like watching a movie for a second time. You just notice or see things that you didn't first time. So.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll catch up that. So Mike, we'll talk a little bit about his awards, and then him and I have talked a little bit about where we're gonna go, but it probably won't go that way. We'll just see how the conversation goes. But like I said, Mike, is a highly decorated former Army Ranger. He's has his Bronze Star Medal with Valor, which earned in 2008 in Afghanistan, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 in 2006 in Iraq, and then 1 in 2008 in Afghanistan, and also has an Army Commendation Medal with P device and C device, and a lot of other stuff that we didn't talk about. Your senior parachutist badge you have that we've talked, master that we talked about, yeah. Which matters, yeah. I have my senior one. He's like, whoa, masters. That's but we were making a joke, and everyone joked before. It matters. The senior and master matters, right?
Sure.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you did those jumps already with a bad back. Those
last two, yeah. I did rehab after the spinal fusion for about 5 months, and just needed to fall out of an airplane 2 more times, and I couldn't leave the Ranger Regiment without the opportunity to just rehab and get at least back into fighting shape, and that was a good way to prove it.
And to get the wreath, right? Around that's an important thing for the airborne people. Like they're like, what is he talking about? But it's a significant number that he reached to get another cool
absolutely
wreath on the airborne wings, which is important. So we talked before. I think we'll flash back to your Ranger Regiment time. We did talk a lot about that.
Yeah.
Another thing about Mike, West Point graduate. I think we missed out on that. Senior when 9/11 kicked off, right, or junior?
I was a plebe.
I can't.
It was
I was trying to make you younger, by the way, but
I appreciate that. Yeah, I was in my second week of my first academic year as a plebe, so had just finished up Beast Barracks. The first cadet summer training that we do there at West Point, and was really only in my second week of class when all that kicked off, and so it was completely changed the tone of the campus, really. For what we were focused on and what was going on. And we knew at that point we were a nation at war. And throughout my time there, of course, the invasion of Afghanistan occurred. And then I was a cadet in 2003, hanging out at Cancun, watching the Iraq war kick off in my hotel room on TV. And young me, was pretty upset about it because I thought I had missed it. Right.
Little did you know, right?
Little did I know, 14 deployments later, but it was one of those things where maybe even going back a little bit further to my second lieutenant days, I think there's a lot of angst as a young lieutenant showing up to your first unit. But showing up to your first unit and being one of the only ones without a combat patch, without a CID, and you're already 4 years deep into the GWAT when you finally commission and do all the requisite things that an infantry lieutenant has to do, go through OBC, airborne school, ranger school, and then you get to your first unit, and you're one of the few that hasn't spent some of them 1 or 2 years already overseas, and you're trying to get a unit prepared to do a mission overseas, and you're one of the few without combat experience. So it was a lot of I would say anxiety going into something like that, but over time learning the people in the unit, specifically the NCOs that want lieutenants to be successful when they show up. And I think that's an extremely important aspect of being a good platoon leader, is relying on those NCOs to get you ready and get your soldiers ready, most importantly, for that. But that was the irony of just looking back on it and saying, man, I thought I missed it. I couldn't have been further from reality, right? So.
Yeah, because I share, a little bit time frame, but 91 happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's from I was in college, the same thing. I think I had a conversation with my dad about wanting to leave school and do that, and wasn't well received. But at that same time, you were like, my dad said, no, you're not doing that, but it's fine. But there was that part of, I think the one thing he said is like, be careful what you wish for might come true.
Right.
You'll get your war. And we all did for a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
The question I didn't ask you back then, so going to the service academy is like, just to catch people up. Your brother was at the Naval Academy at the same time as you.
Mm-hmm.
You have a huge history of military service before that. What would it have been like if you had been a couple years younger and the nation was at war? Would that have changed your mind of where you went?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it probably would have just reaffirmed what a lot of people did after 9/11, which was sign up, whether it was enlist or take whatever path it was that they did after 9/11 to join the military. I think it would have just reaffirmed the calling that I felt when I was younger. And I shared this story with a different group of business folks earlier this week. This is the year of the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the all volunteer force in the military in the United States. And so there are some negative stereotypes associated with the military, one of which you kind of loosely touched on, which is I wasn't smart enough to go to college, so I went to the military, and that's a 5 decades old negative stereotype of the military. A lot of people don't know that the average IQ of someone in the military is actually higher than the general population of the United States. And so I was telling the story about how, looking back in high school, when I was telling people and trying to explain to them how I felt like I was being called to serve in uniform, a lot of people would say, well, Michael, you don't want to do that. You're too smart. You're too smart to join the military. You should go to college, right? We might call that a microaggression now on campus, but it was one of those things that people would say to me, and it didn't necessarily register in the appropriate manner. It almost kind of reaffirmed how I felt. And that pamphlet came in the mail. I didn't know much about ROTC, but that West Point pamphlet showed up when I was a junior, and the light bulb came on and said, hey, I can go to college. I can get an education. I cannot saddle my third generation auto mechanic father and my mom with additional financial burden of student loans or helping me pay for college. And on top of all that, I really like this, team captain stuff in high school and being a leader. And so joining the military and getting to do all of that was kind of like icing on the cake for me. So at that point I was all in, and that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and I thought that was going to be the answer that you had. I mean, because if you look at the numbers, they prove it. It's there's a lot of comparison with World War II, I think, and when the Greatest Generation and the nation was at war, and you hear about the draft and things like that. But our generation really stepped forward. There's so many people that went to the call. I mean, they were doing something different. But once 9/11 happened, a lot of people changed their life and threw themselves into it. Absolutely. Rather than what a lot of people think about. And the reason I brought that up is I think a lot of people still today, and we'll talk more about the cadets, is the younger generation gets a lot of shit about being lazy and not leaving their country and not wanting to serve. But it's really not true. I mean, that's something that's never changed in my mind. It may look a little different to some people, but we still have enough people that are willing to serve their country.
Yeah, I think there's those people existed in every generation, right? The ones that were lazy and didn't want to serve, and then the ones that decided to raise their right hand. So I think that's a great point. When you talk about people that are lazy and don't want to do work, not in our program, right? That's not a thing. Lieutenant bars are not participation trophies, and that's something I reinforce with the cadets in a program where we expect excellence and accountability to be something that happens on a daily basis, whether it's PT, academics, extracurriculars, all that kind of stuff. It's just showing up is not enough. Right? And they have to understand that as cadets, because just showing up as a lieutenant is also not enough. Right. And that's what you're going to be expected to do in the future.
Yeah. And I think in the last podcast, we talked about, your entry into the military as a platoon leader, your initial jump in could be more different than mine. And if you look back and you're really analyzing and you're not, trying to, throw the old, you don't understand this, you understand. Like I told you in that podcast before, I still am jealous of that. I'm still jealous of the cadets now that are coming in, because I think honestly, if you talk to them, they're smarter than we probably were. A lot of them were a lot more fit than we were. It's a lot more competitive. People think it isn't, but these people I see, it's pretty competitive. And sometimes I think back to myself, like, would I be able to compete with today's generation on that? I think we would, but
Sure.
Because we'd have that same, exposure we're getting. But yeah, I asked that question because I think a lot of people, I hate hearing that about veterans. Like, it was harder here, it was harder then, it was, harder in, this place and that place. And we're responsible for that ourselves. We created that,
Sure,
that false, narrative, I guess,
I agree with that.
and it's a different one. So we'll talk, Mike talked about that. Let's go to the Ranger Regiment. Let's like rewind a little bit about, you want to talk about how to get into the Ranger Regiment as an officer? You talk about
sure.
that real quick. So
Yeah.
he'll do a lot better than I will, I'm sure.
So there are two different pathways to get into the Ranger Regiment. One is called RASP 1 and RASP 2 is the other one. So Ranger Assessment and Selection Program used to be called RIP and ROPE. So Ranger Indoctrination Program and then Ranger Orientation Program. RASP 1 is E1 to E5. Mostly the traditional route would be you finish up all your one station unit training at now Fort Moore, formerly Fort Benning, and then you go to airborne school, or you go to RASP now and then go to airborne school. But you go through the pipeline to be assessed and selected by the Ranger Regiment, and then as a E1 to E5, you then get assigned to a Ranger battalion, and then RASP 2 is a shorter. RASP 1's 8 weeks. RASP 2 is 3 weeks. You go through a series of tests and you are assessed and selected through a series of different things, whether it's physical tests like 5-mile run, PT test, 12-mile road march, that kind of stuff, as well as psychological evaluation and everything else. So it's a little bit different in how you're introduced to the regiment, but it hasn't changed too much since I was there. There's usually a field problem and the road march, the physical aspect, and then it culminates with a board for RASP 2. And you're interviewed by leaders of the Ranger Regiment and then selected for the position. And then you go back to your losing unit, clear, and then move out to whatever battalion or element of the Ranger Regiment that you're selected to participate in.
And the people don't know that's E6 and above, but generally those people have been in other units, conventional units, and have been successful with that. And that's what we talked a lot about the last episode. So these are senior leaders and established leaders that have went in the conventional forces and proven themselves,
right,
and made it. So, that time, if we go back, Mike had already had a pretty long deployment, your first deployment,
yep,
and the conventional army out of Alaska. You decided to join the Ranger Regiment. Luckily, you get to go back and do the best job in the military, right? Become a platoon leader
again, yeah.
Which is so crazy. That's the one thing I forgot is how much platoon leader time you had.
Yeah,
it's nuts.
It's kind of unheard of now, especially the way that from what I've heard, a lot of the lieutenants, they're lucky if they get 12 months, right? And so I was in a unit for 25 months in Alaska, 14 of which was overseas. And I stayed in the same position the whole time. So I had the opportunity to be a PL for the same platoon for virtually over 2 years. And then PCS to Savannah, 1st Ranger Battalion. And my first rotation there, I got to be a platoon leader again before I became an XO.
So let's talk about that introduction. We've talked a lot in the last episode. You kind of alluded to it a little bit here tonight. You're brand new second lieutenant. You show up to Alaska. Mm-hmm. You have people that have been in combat, right? Intimidating, right? Sure. Now, even though you have 2 years of experience, you checked all the blocks, you show up as a platoon leader at the Ranger Regiment.
Yep.
Intimidated?
Yeah, of course. I mean, hindsight being 2020, and especially the people that I got to know over time, it was a place that I knew I was wanted to go. When I was a cadet at West Point, one of the more seminal moments of my time there that I remember was Captain Nate Self came and spoke. So for those that don't know Nate Self, he was a Ranger platoon leader on Roberts Ridge. And so during Operation Anaconda, Neil Roberts was a SEAL who, when a CH-47 or a Chinook MH-47 took off off on the side of a mountain. Neil Roberts wasn't tethered in and fell off the back of the ramp. And due to a series of circumstances, a quick reaction force, or QRF, was activated. Nate Self was the platoon leader for that Ranger element, and they fought their way up the mountain to try to recover Neil Roberts. And their helicopter, in the process of that, also got shot down. And so they ended up on the side of Tucker Gar. And there's a book called Roberts Ridge, which is an incredible read. But going back to Nate Self, he came back to West Point to talk, and he had his experience with 1st Ranger Battalion. He also had his experience with the 101st in the invasion of Iraq. So he was a Ranger platoon leader in Afghanistan. Then he was a company commander in the 101st during the Iraq invasion. And then he came back to West Point and talked to cadets. So when it comes to people that you want to emulate as a cadet, that was someone that I really latched onto. And on top of that, I played a sport at West Point called sprint football. So it's college football, but you have to make weight like a wrestler. And Nate was an offensive team captain for that team in '99, about 5 years before I was the defensive team captain for the same team. And so I knew of Nate Self. But then, of course, when I heard his story, it was extremely compelling to me. And after that, becoming a Ranger platoon leader was all I ever wanted to be in the Army. Everything else has just been icing on the cake. But that story and hearing Nate talk, I went to, I think he spoke at like Fellowship of Christian Athletes in the morning. So I went to that. And then I found out he was speaking at lunch. So I went to lunch, and then he had an evening panel that all of us were voluntold we had to go to anyway. So, but I'd already, listened to him twice, and it was just, couldn't get enough of it. And, fast forward to going to Savannah, you find yourself in this situation where you're absolutely where you wanted to be and where you visualized yourself. But then the opportunity to serve with your heroes every day, specifically the Ranger non-commissioned officers, it was just an incredible experience every single day to just show up and just be around those people that day in and day out have done some of the heavy lifting for our country time and time again. Was just incredibly humbling to be there, because you knew every single day you had to bring your A game. And one of the sayings that they say is every single day you have to earn your tan beret. No one can take it from you. You have to give it away. But every single day you have to show up and earn it.
And just put that in perspective, people, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at that point, you had 14 months deployed, already a Purple Heart, Bronze Star. At that point, you had it before Archon, V device. Yeah. You earned your keep as an infantry officer. You got your CIB. You passed a program that not a lot of people pass to get in. You pass an interview, but you're still intimidated, and that's I think it's our first talk about mental health, right? Like about assessing yourself. Like at that point, you would think most people would think you felt like you were the shit, right? But really, you may have thought that, but deep in your mind, what were you thinking?
I think going forward to my time as an aide, when I was working for actually an Air Force general, one of the things that he and I talked about, there was this article that we read, and I think he read it and then shared it with me. But it talked about almost like the opposite. We talked growth mindset last time I was here, right? And the opposite of that is, if I showed up to a unit like that and told myself I've arrived, that's the beginning of the end. The opposite of earning your tan beret every day is that sense of entitlement that I'm here and I've therefore earned something more than what it is I'm doing. But at a unit like that, you have to show up every day and give it your best. The creed says 100% and then some. And that's what everybody expected every time we showed up to work. So it was incredibly humbling to be there, especially to serve with the people that I did and to get to know the people that I did down there. And my wife and I have always compared every other place that we've been in the military to Savannah. It was a time in our lives that we always kind of look back on, and we got married before my first deployment, but I was a geo bachelor in Alaska. We did, of course, the whole safety brief. Don't get married right before deployment. We did that, and then I took off.
Way to listen.
Yeah. What we thought was a 12-month that turned into a 14-month deployment, and then I came back. She was a year behind me at West Point. And so even when I got back from that 14-month deployment, being a year behind, she was still at flight school at Fort Rucker. And so when I had PCS to Savannah, she was still going through training. Then I deployed for the first time, and she didn't even get there until after I left. And so the first time we actually lived together was after my first deployment with 1st Ranger Battalion. And it was the end of January of 2009. So we'd been married for almost 2.5 years before we actually lived under the same roof. But then I did 2 more rotations there with her, two captains without kids. And, we eventually got a dog and all that kind of stuff. But it was an incredible time for us to finally get reacquainted, get to know each other in a more deeper level than what we had before. And then serve and do things that we both wanted to do. My wife wanted to be a pilot. She first flew Blackhawks and then did fixed wing transition. So she flew a C-12. And then I was getting to do exactly what I wanted to do in the Army, which was be a Ranger platoon leader. And then I did move up to be a company XO, but even then I had the opportunity to be a ground force commander. So it was still a great opportunity. And I loved it, which is why I wanted to go back eventually. But it was just an incredible time to be around incredible people.
Let's go back real quick on something. So, you just talked about being a high tempo unit, first Ranger Battalion in Savannah, right? You're a men among men, right? Is a good way to put it. You're earning your tan beret. You've been disconnected from, so there's a stress of that earning your keep, fitting in, right? Mm-hmm. You've been away from your wife for a couple of years.
Yep.
You're getting reacquainted then. Mm-hmm. What's in your mind? Because like a term you might know is like, were you doing anything to numb? Or what was your mindset then? Because that's a lot. You say it very casual, like it's normal, like, and it is for some people, but it's not normal to not see to live with your spouse for a couple of years, for both of you to have really successful careers.
Yeah.
Not just successful careers, but like flying an aircraft is not a low stress thing, right? So what do you contribute to what made you be able to do that and function?
One, it was the camaraderie and the unit pride. I was finally finally isn't the right term, because I love the platoon that I was in for the 25 months. You get to know people so well at that point. I could look at someone at the end of a deployment and see their silhouette from a couple 100 meters away. And just by the gait of their walk, I knew who they were, getting to Savannah and being around those people just always challenged me to be, the best version of myself I could be. And I think perhaps where you're going with some of this, and maybe I'll take this part of the conversation in a particular direction, is last time I was here, we talked about the anti-Invictus mentality, right? The Invictus mentality, I'm the master of my fate and the captain of my soul. And that's a great mentality to have until it doesn't work, right? Because then you're in a situation where you're not in control. And last time I was here, I shared what I would call probably the worst day of my life. Mm-hmm. When I was in 1st Ranger Battalion, I had the worst night of my life. And so if you back up to my Iraq deployment in the 25th Infantry Division, I was a second lieutenant who deployed and in 14 months brought every single human I was responsible for back alive. And for the most part, all in one piece, with most of everything intact, aside from maybe some TBI and injuries and that kind of stuff. My first deployment as a Ranger platoon leader, my second Purple Heart was actually on my first mission. probably for just talking too loud on a radio, but we were doing a clearance operation, and I was outside the compound. They kind of turned the last courtyard into the Alamo, and the guys inside the courtyard started chucking hand grenades outside, and myself and my FO RTO got fragged. And I remember I think it was probably fentanyl at the cache after getting the wound wash out and getting treated and everything, looking at my platoon sergeant and just saying to him, is it like this every night? You know?
What the hell did I just go?
Yeah, it's like, okay, well,
I wasn't even in there. No, yeah.
And so, you know, that was kind of my mindset. It was like, okay, well, this is real. And we had some significant injuries, one of which was an incredible story about keeping a team leader alive on the side of a mountain. But Ryan Olick, thankfully, made it that night. So even coming back from my second deployment and having people wounded and you know, awards for valor and all that kind of stuff, still brought everybody home. Now, there was some more significant injuries, but, you know, you can kind of see the build there of a little bit of confidence, a little bit of been there, done that, got the T-shirt. Now, not just check the Iraq box, but check the Afghanistan box, right? And then I roll into my third deployment, and I am a Ranger Company XO. I'm a ground force commander for a strike force. And, you know, we took some significant losses to include losing Sergeant Rob Sanchez and dealing with a mass casualty situation on the back end of an operation that was going well until it wasn't. And, you know, it's one of those things where you're kind of doing sensitive site exploitation. The mission is pretty much over, you know, killed multiple enemy, and we're just kind of doing the consolidation, reorganization. And, you know, you go back to the Invictus or anti-Invictus mentality, however you want to look at it, but we had a planned HLZ that night. And this goes back to also the ruminating about the what ifs and what could I have done different. Yeah. You rewind the tape over and over and over again. And we had a planned HLZ that night, and the ISR assets identified it as a Great Rose that was not a place that helicopters could land. And so we go into that, and they recommend a different helicopter landing zone. And we say, okay, we'll go there, right? And we rock across the footbridge that we didn't plan on walking across, and Rob stepped on pressure plate ID. This was as we were moving to Exville. So a successful mission all of a sudden turned into a catastrophic situation where a team leader is killed. At first, we could not locate the weapon squad leader. He was close to and was the head of the DZSO party or HLZ party that was going out to secure the site, and was blown face down into a canal. We had a gun team leader who was close to the blast who had one of his legs below the knee amputated. And then I believe 5 other people who had various injuries, whether it was rocks or shrapnel that had hit them in the face, or, you know, rocks in the ass, or, you know, whatever. But we had multiple casualties, at least one person that was unaccounted for, a Ranger team leader that was at the blast that we were trying to account for as well. And, you know, what turned from a great operation into a horrible night in an instant. But it was also one of the moments overseas where I think I'm most proud to see how people reacted to that, and how a reliance on training and trust in each other. You know, the EOD guy immediately went into searching the area for secondaries. The platoon sergeant, you know, I remember doing a quick huddle, and myself, the platoon leader and the platoon sergeant all linked up. We looked at each other. I said, I'll take the CASEVAC, pointed at the platoon leader, you take security, and the platoon sergeant, I said, you need to get accountability of the men and the equipment, right? And that's what everybody started doing. And everything from the 160th pilots that got in to the PA that helped bring Corey Remsburg back to life after he had virtually drowned in a canal face down with a traumatic brain injury, and treating all the wounded and getting them to the casualty collection point. And then the pilots who flew in and landed a bus in a place that, you know, a Chinook should never be capable of landing in, and getting those guys out. That was a seminal moment for me. And, you know, going back to the, how do you cope with that, or how do you deal with the pressure? It's one thing when you're dealing with it, when you're, you know, feeling like you're walking on cloud nine and you're coming back from these deployments, and yeah, you get banged up or whatever, but you still bring everybody home, to feeling like a failure because you didn't, and feeling like you let people down because of something you might have missed or something you might have overlooked. And, you know, having to cope with that on the back end of a deployment was extremely challenging. Right. And you're trying to still come home. You're trying to reintegrate with your wife. You're trying to reintegrate with the unit. You're trying to stay connected to the Gold Star family who lost their son. And oh, by the way, the weapons squad leader that you lost, he's still down in Tampa in a coma, and you don't know if he's ever going to come out of it. So, and you know, this is not something that people talk about because paperwork isn't sexy and it's extremely boring and it's tedious. But I also had to live that night over and over again because I was also the XO that had to work with my supply and CO to deal with all the property loss. So every single day in paperwork with flippals and accountability and property book and everything else, I lived that night, and then I had to rip the scab or the Band-Aid off every single day beyond that, because it took months to account for some of the equipment that we couldn't account for that night, in addition to the loss of life. And so that just served as a constant reminder every single day for damn near the rest of that next training rotation to be ready for the next deployment. And I think one of the things I didn't talk about that I wanted to share, I alluded to it in the last podcast about talking about the 2012 deployment, specifically the worst day of my life, April 25th, 2012, and how I felt like the next morning after I said that prayer on the roof, where I felt like I was going to step off and potentially that was my last day on earth, because I thought I was going to die, but I was at peace with it. It goes back to that lead up to the next deployment after the 2009 deployment, when we lost Rob Sanchez and had the Mascow, was my third deployment with 1st Ranger Battalion. We deployed in July. January 19th of 2010, Paul Pena, Captain Paul Pena from the 82nd, the 508th, was killed in Arghandab district from an IED. Meg and I got to see Heather Hallbrook and her husband, Jason, so Captain Jason Hallbrook, in June. And July 29th of 2010, Jason is killed by an IED in Cochrez while he's establishing a support by fire on a four-wheeler with his medic. Paul and Jason were my two roommates when I was a second lieutenant in Alaska. So when I was going into that 2012 deployment with a wife, with a 4.5-month-old daughter, my two roommates had already been killed in Kandahar province. And then I found out I was going to Zari district that touched both of the other two districts that my two roommates had been killed in. And I was going to Kandahar province. So there was a part of me that when I said goodbye to my wife on that 2012 deployment, I didn't necessarily have any plans on actually coming home.
Right.
You know, we can talk about birthdays and grief and some of that stuff later on. But, certainly one of the things that I said when I was having my 40th birthday was I never thought I was going to live to see my 30th, let alone my 40th. Right. And that 2010 deployment, I think, was after dealing with some of that stuff with numbing and everything from the 2009 deployment going into 2010. That was the deployment, and losing Jason was really something where I realized that I needed to get my head out of my fourth point of contact and stop feeling sorry for myself.
Are you not allowed to say ass at Ohio State, or?
Well,
He's saying ass for. I'm joking.
Yeah, head out of my ass. Or for the paratroopers that are listening, my fourth point of contact.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Yeah. And so I just think that, kind of coming full circle on that Invictus thing, there's a level of hubris, I think, a lot of times with youth that creeps in until reality smacks you in the face. And we talked a little bit about that my first time. But man, that was a gut check. October 1st, 2009, when I experienced true loss in combat for the first time in my own unit. When I say unit, we lost people in my company when I was a platoon leader. So we did lose 3 people in my company. But as the ground force commander that night, it just meant something a little bit different. Right. And so last time I was on, I shared the worst day of my life. I kind of felt compelled this time to share the worst night of my life, because I learned some hard and valuable lessons that evening. And, one of which is in some of the worst circumstances, you see emotions like love come out in ways that you never thought you would see. And I think that is one of the reasons why, when you talk about things like Band of Brothers, or whether you want to sarcastically talk about it like we did last time about trauma bonding and everything else, it just means something different when you're around other people that have borne the same hardships that you have. And that's something that I think should be celebrated on a day like today, literally on the eve almost of Veterans Day, because that's something that every veteran, whether they had an experience like that or not in combat, that is something that they still willingly sign themselves up for. Right. It is what is the definition of a veteran? It is someone who signed a blank check to our country for the amount of up to and including their life. And that's something that, when you talk about why is it important to have these ceremonies and have cadets participate in it and sign yourself up for it and be a part of it, it's extremely important to me, because it honors those people who have gone before us and who have worn the uniform. And it is something that should be celebrated in this country and should be viewed as admirable.
100%. I think it's and Mike, we have some papers here. We'll go into some stuff we read, but just what Mike had just talked about before, and I'll ask you a question after, but I want to read, he just told you something in terms of, this is a speech he just gave here a couple of days ago, the past couple of days. And I'm going to, as we talk tonight, we'll pull some spots up. I wish you'd given this to me before. I might've been better. I feel like this was like a test to see if I could pull out the good stuff. I think I got the good stuff though. So the one thing I want to read is what he just talked about, the worst day of his life, the worst night of his life. And I'll follow up with a question after I read this, but I've witnessed a litany of dead bodies, including enemy combatants, friendly casualties, and wounded civilians. I've made decisions that have ultimately contributed to the death of some of my men to accomplish our assigned mission. I've seen some of our best never come home in one piece, and locals I have partnered with torn to shreds. When an elder was left by his fellow Afghans, I put on rubber gloves and walked through an uncleared minefield to recover pieces of his body. My creed necessitates I never leave a fallen comrade. So, that paragraph on top, if you just read that paragraph, and if anyone's listening to digest that, there's so many things that are going on in there. And it's I think that paragraph to me is like what a lot of people forget about what some people have seen. And we'll talk about when, I had a really bad night last night. The worst night of my life was, this or that.
Yeah.
It's all perspective, because it could have been that person's worst night or worst day, but
Sure.
a lot of people have had really, really
Bad days and
bad
bad
days and bad nights.
Yeah,
So that's always remembered. But let me ask you, so that the bad day and bad night, you get that designation. I know you've relived those days over and over, and that night over and over again. Have there been worse nights reliving that, or was that moment really the worst night? And
I think associated with those nights, I've never had some sort of a dream or a day where I've relived it in the sense of feelings. I think there's some times where maybe a sight or a smell or something can kind of bring you back to a time, but I think I've been fortunate in perhaps some of the other symptoms that I know that some people have experienced, like bad dreams and that kind of stuff. So that's not something that I've ever truly personally experienced. I mean, I think you could ask my wife, and she would tell you the same thing, that both that day and that night, even for her, in a lot of ways, because we talked about the hardship that she had to carry as a rear detachment XO, and accounting for all those, and reading red stripe messages of people within your husband's company that are getting sent home in various states, alive or wounded, and wounded or not. And but it's also the creed and dealing with that. It goes back to kind of, if not me, then who, right? And I feel like I've always been put in a circumstance armed with the right tools, and that God has never put me in a situation where I was incapable of dealing with what was thrown at me at the time.
I'm going to add one thing to that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One of the things I've grown to know you as a friend and a brother now, that we talk about these things, is you talk about you haven't had those nightmares, you haven't had those thoughts and came to it. I will tell you that you're very different. You know that already, but the one thing that I think you're different than a lot of us are, but similar to me, is that we talk about our experiences.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge key to getting it out, is to talk about these experiences, to get them out, not to just relive them yourself, is key. Because what you find very quickly is that, holy shit, somebody else has a really bad day too.
Yeah.
And and I want to read something. I want to add that part about when it comes to that, is because, what Mike is saying, and somebody just put up a comment here. Scott said that, out for 21 years, and I didn't know talks like this still existed. They don't always exist like that, Scott, but I think, I have a lot of respect for you and love for you, and just like everything that you always talk about what's going through, for us to get through all we're dealing with, and because we're not taught to do that. We're taught to keep it inside. But so Mike has shared some things, but I just want to talk about sharing. But as veterans share, especially this weekend, you see pictures and things like that. This was another quote that, quoting Mike, another simple recommendation is to listen. There's no need for a hollow, I know what you're going through, because it's likely you don't, and that's okay. Allow those who are willing to tell their stories. And if you listen intently, you may learn a thing or two, not just about the military, but about life and how you can heal right now in a nation of divisiveness. So, that's a key thing. Is like, a lot of the times, is I just talked to somebody about this today, is like, around this time, Veterans Day is always thinking, everybody wants to thank you and thank you and thank you. And to some of us, it's just like, I don't like to be thanked. I never like that. Like, my dad, if you see him over there, he's wearing his Vietnam veterans hat. I get it. It's a different generation. But to me, whenever I get thanked for my service, I feel guilty. And why I feel guilty is I feel guilty about, I wasn't really the one that sacrificed, because everything I was doing, I wanted to do it. But he really sacrificed my family and my kids. So it triggers something to me. Like, so I there's a part of me that wants to be thanked, but there's a part of it that doesn't, because there's a lot of guilt. But for all the veterans that are listening out there, like you have to be like Mike. You got to like some of the things that you're unpacking here. Like a lot of people will not talk about it, and if they do talk about it, to be honest with you, you got to pay a lot of money to hear somebody talk about this, right? Mike is in the Columbus area. He's going to be talking again on Saturday. We'll talk about that. You can talk about it later, but
Sure.
The key thing is what Mike is sharing with you is not very common, and it's not very common from what when I would consider Mike to be as an elite warfighter, right? Because a lot of times the things they talk about, vulnerability, it's perceived as weakness. All these kind of things are going to tell you a bunch of shit about how it is what it is, but that's not true. So that part is like, if you're a veteran, like, get it out, man. Find somebody you can talk to. It's key about everything. And even if you're not a veteran, some things that you're going through, we can maybe talk about that later. Sure. It's to find somebody you can chat with and talk about things. But if you are, and I'm the worst at it sometimes, is I'm not great at listening, but I'm trying to get better at that. But if you are somebody that's not a veteran and someone's talking about these things, is a lot of the time is just listen. And like Mike said, better, you might learn something about the military, and you're sure it's how you can learn something about the military. And you're sure as hell going to learn something about life, right?
Yeah. In the special operations community, there are a lot of people that I've run into that you could easily underestimate based on size or appearance, because we always want to judge a book by its cover, and it's usually the guy sitting in the back of the room just kind of taking it all in, maybe with a couple wrinkles, wearing a t-shirt or a pair of Carhartts or something that might be a contractor or whatever. And, next thing you find out, he's the guy that was like the RTO on Desert One that like transformed the military by figuring out how to make satellites talk to radios and stuff. So it's always one of those things where, you might look at someone and just immediately cast judgment, but to actually hear them, and then for that person that's sharing to actually feel heard. I think that's another key aspect of it, because as I've talked about before in some of the things that I shared over a business networking discussion was we all communicate through stories, and stories build connection and empathy. And without that empathy and without sharing our stories, I personally think that, one, we are denying the American population the opportunity to understand the dwindling population of people that are now less than 0.5% of the United States population who have worn a uniform in the global war on terror. Right. The huge difference between roughly 11.8% of the United States who wore a uniform in some capacity in World War II. Everyone had someone in their family who served. Right. My grandma had 4 brothers, including, her dad, who was my great grandfather, who served in World War I. So, I mean, there are connections to the greatest generation wherever you look. For the boomers that are still alive, they can tell you who in their family and what they did and all that kind of stuff. That's not the same anymore. You might have somebody in the neighborhood or someone that lives down the street, but it's not necessarily someone in the family anymore. It might be I know a guy that knows a guy, right? And so it's important for us to share those stories, because then what you end up with is someone else, whether it's Hollywood or otherwise, that share our stories in an inaccurate manner, and oftentimes kind of like you don't want to go to the military because you're too smart, you need to go to college, kind of thing. It reinforces.
Isn't it amazing that that's still out there? It just shocks me.
It's 50 years old,
and it's like the line that never stops. So.
Yeah, and so the negative stereotypes or the two, I think, ends of the spectrum oftentimes is there's the impregnable Captain America who goes off to war, comes back, maybe gets a couple scratches on him, but gets the girl and rides off into the sunset without any issues, right? And then on the other side, there's this broken Rambo vagabond that is walking down the side of a street with no direction, a double bag, and a bottle of Jim Beam. Right?
Great movie, though.
Yeah, of course. It's a great movie.
But really shitty way to really.
But like you've already highlighted, we're all in the middle.
Yep.
We're just human beings trying to live our lives and find meaning in and beyond our time in uniform that provides for our family and heals and still has connection with people, whether it's with our former brothers we serve with or with the people in our community, and finding that second mission or purpose in life beyond what their time in uniform was, which is, why things like Portsmouth Patriots is such a righteous endeavor in and of itself, is to maintain that connection and keep that conversation going so that people are willing to share their experiences. Because a lot of times I'll just tell you, you pat me on the back for what you just said about my willingness to share. I wasn't always like that.
Oh no, yeah, we all weren't. Yeah, but
it took until the time I was a major and in grad school for me to really open up. And that 2009 to 2010 timeframe, things like onset inflammation of the esophagus due to stress, things that were manifesting itself in the physical space of my body that really started with the mental stuff, was eating me from the inside out. Right, I was putting on weight. I was drinking too much. I had GERD. All the kind of stuff that just I didn't have a neck because I was just lifting a bunch and trying to work out that anger and frustration in the gym. And over time, that stuff's going to just wear you down. Right. And having a conversation or finding an outlet, it might not be talking. Some people, there's all kinds of stuff, right? There's Portsmouth Patriots, there's Havoc Journal, there's people who write poetry, like my great grandfather did when he came back from World War I. There's people who my outlet is writing. It's talking now too, but that took some time, right? And so there's different outlets out there, whether it's watching some Ranger TV over a fire and having a cigar and being connected to another veteran and sharing your story in a tight-knit group of people that you trust, right? Or it's sharing your experiences with a stranger, or it's journaling, or it's writing, or it's whatever it is. But you have to find that outlet, otherwise it's going to eat you from the inside.
100%, yeah. And I mean, we say talk, but Mike just brought into a little bit more perspective. As talk. I mean, a lot. It's express yourself is a good way to put it. And there's a lot of ways you can express yourself, like Mike just said. And one of the things the most powerful thing about that is there's one sentence to me that's interesting. Then we'll go to our first featured whiskey is the use of words, right? So I would have added something to this, and I'm glad I didn't write this because I think it's really powerful if you think about this. The sentence I'm going to read again is like, and if you listen intently, you may learn a thing or two, not just about the military, but about life. I would have added on that and death.
Yeah.
But those words I don't think that's what it is. A lot of things you're talking about with all the death is life. I kind of look at it. So that's sure. If I were your speechwriter, I probably would have put that, and then we would have had a really good argument about why we're taking that out, and I get it. So that's really powerful. But yeah, that is a lot of things about it's true. Like some of the guys in the background, but what I mean about it is like, it's not talking about, we don't need to talk about the death of our brothers and sisters that we served about. We need to talk about their life, right? We need to, and that's how I look at it, is like, their death is important, but that's what I'm saying. It's life. And that's what you learn. And part of life is death. Like, it doesn't matter if you're, death is going to come to everyone. You can't cheat that one, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to come. So,
and Chad, I think taking it a level deeper for veterans and those that have served in the profession of arms, we talk about this with the cadets in my class, specifically with the seniors. When you talk about the profession of arms, and this goes to Dr. Don Snyder, is a ethics instructor that's been a stalwart of the Army community for a long time. But one of the things that he talks about, there's 4 requirements. That's it. When you boil down what do I have to do in the profession of arms? What is required of me? It's 4 things, right? It is training to kill, and if required, to kill. But if you're in the killing business, you also have to be in the dying business, which means you also have to prepare to die. And if required, based on the mission and what your nation calls you to do, it is also to die. So when you talk about the profession of arms, you can't talk about killing and living without the possibility of understanding that on the receiving end of that could also be death, dying, and destruction. Right?
No, 100%. I just look at the speech. I was lucky enough to read the whole thing, so there's just something that caught me in that of like, we know that we were in that profession. You were in that profession, still I was in that profession. Many of us were, but I think it's just more powerful. How I look at it differently, how I see it is different. You know, what I mean, I like that you left that off. So the one thing that about Mike I love too is he's consistent. Is how I'm meaning that I thought he was going to change up his whiskey choice. He stayed with the same distillery. So Bardstown Bourbon Company, you got to send Mike something like a hat or something. I got to get you something because he had a chance to change it up. He went straight back to the bourbon, the Bardstown Bourbon Company, who we've talked about once, but we've talked about like indirectly with some stuff. So they're located in Bardstown, Kentucky. The distillery was founded in 2014, and it started producing whiskey in 2016. It currently distills about 50 different unique mash bills from more than 30 different spirit brands, which we'll get to shortly here about this. They're doing a lot of stuff for everybody else. The distillery provides more than 7 million proof gallons annually, making amongst the top 10 producing whiskey distillers in the United States. That's actually custom distilleries because they do produce for everybody else. And in 2022, last year, the distillery was acquired by PPC. In 2019, the Bardstown Bourbon Company launched its own branded product, which we see today. If you're into whiskey, you've seen some different ones. I can't remember. I don't
Discovery
drink.
Series,
Discovery Series, all
Series,
those, like it'll come to me. But they right now, I think the last it may be up a bit higher, but they're about in 20 different markets throughout the nation. They have the collaboration series, fusion series, Discovery Series. And what's cool about it is, like we talked about last time, and if you've never been there, it's like one of the coolest things that ties in distilleries and food and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like going to California in the Napa Valley. They call it the Napa Valley of Bardstown, and they have a huge tie into the military, which I think is probably why we talked last time. Why you like, but he brought the Origin Series tonight. What's great about Origin Series, last one he talked about, all those were blends of source whiskey with their product, but the Origin Series is the first time that they produce their own. This is 100% Bardstown Bourbon Company. This is 6 years old, 96 proof, mash bill 60% corn, 36% rye, and 4% malted barley. So this is, if you're kind of nerdy, we don't get to, we do sometimes get nerdy on about whiskey, but we talk about their own distillate. Before they were using MGP and some other people blending with their own stuff to get what they want, but now this is their first, go with their own product, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's a big milestone for them, and one that
I mean, I didn't think if you have some kind of like monetary interest in this. Now I'm joking.
I own no stock in Bardstown Bourbon Company.
What about PPC? We need to talk about that.
But it's a great story in the sense that the president and is a former unit commander in SOF, and they take pride in hiring veterans and bringing them onto the team. And with the Origin Series, it was something that I thought was cool because we talked about it last time, and then the launch happened, and finally got my hands on a bottle when I was down in Kentucky 2 weeks ago for my ROTC programs, Ranger Challenge, and hunted down a bottle so I could bring it on the show. But and it's also just with the veteran theme, I thought it was appropriate to kind of stick with it. So. No,
it is great. It's good stuff. I mean, if you're going down there, if you're in the Bourbon Trail, you've got to go to the Bardstown Bourbon Company. It is the food there is to kill for. They have a really old library if you're lucky enough to get back and look at some stuff. But it's really good. I mean, it's exciting to see if you're like an old timer like me that's been into whiskey for a while to be able to for somebody to transition to their own stuff. It's kind of cool, and it's actually really freaking good. I gotta give you that. It's really good.
It's smooth, and I think the other thing too, if you go to that distillery. It's it's a stark contrast from a place that if you go to like the Jim Beam place, you know, when you go to their distillery, it's still the way that Grandpappy made it.
Yeah.
Right. Everything about it is still a little bit of Kentucky windage, a little bit of adjustments here and there. Everything that Bardstown Bourbon Company does is largely, even when I was there years ago and getting the tour, they were already looking at things like integrating AI into how they make things. So it's very scientific, auto-correcting systems, closed systems, the pipes, everything that they do there. And so the way I've described it to friends is it's like going to Jurassic Park for bourbon. Spared no expense, very scientific, like everything is top class. And then their ability to scale not only their stuff, but the way that they built that place to also help other companies scale because of the scientific nature and the way that they build things and produce things. They can take other people's product, raw materials and recipe, and essentially produce it for them.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's a great place. I mean, there's something to be said too. I'm like old school. I always have to go back and forth, and if people talk whiskey with me, I get super passionate about it and be like, "You're wrong." No, but there is something to go back about what they're doing. They did. It's super modern, right? So if you've been to like Knob Creek or Wild Turkey, you know, or you go there and Beam, that you watch the same thing that ends up happening. Like Beam does the same thing. They build a really nice restaurant, but like it's growing because you have to get different people and a different generation of people in track. But it's definitely like the analogy they talk about it being like Napa Valley bourbon, 100% get it. Yeah, it's like, I mean, there's people that'll be eating there at the distillery. They have no interest in whiskey, but they're just eating there for good food. So it's pretty cool to do so. And also, I'm glad you brought it too, because it makes it easy for me to do my research. I just got to plug some stuff in. It allows me to slack off a little bit. Which is, it's been a crazy couple of weeks for all of us. But so where do we go next? Like you and I've talked about it before. I talked about somebody off there. You know, people get mad about not wanting to, like, I'm okay with not hearing any more war stories for the rest of the night.
That's
right?
fine. Sure.
Unless she wants more. I think there's some deeper parts of that, but I mean, kind of being
wherever you want to take it.
This is your I'm just here to talk about the whiskey and make sure you don't get in trouble a little bit, I guess. I mean, I thought one of the things to talk about is, you know, we a lot of things are going on. So we could talk about your career probably for like 6 hours. Before, the one thing I do want to say before I hand it back up to you is I listen to a lot of podcasts just like you do, right? And just recently listened to one, the Sean Ryan Show, which has a former Delta operator who is the founder. Him and his wife are the founders of all Secure Foundation.
Oh yeah.
Really long, 6 hours. You know, if you don't listen to the Sean Ryan Show, you should.
Tom Satterley, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So Black Hawk Down. He's one of the original operators there, but I've heard him say that before. I've heard some of it. Both you and I know Jeff, and I heard you say it tonight for the first time. And he said on the podcast is there was a point in your life that you knew you weren't going. You with faith knew that your life could be over and it was okay.
Yeah.
Like talk about that a little bit, because you're like the fourth person I've heard say that. If I had to think, I could think of the other one, but you have Jeff, who we knew, Black Hawk Down, Tom, Black Hawk Down, you, and I've heard other people say, but there's a point of like you've handed yourself off. You're in the middle of chaos. You're in the middle of the worst things. And what's crazy about it is I hear that, and then there's many of you that have given into that, but it wasn't the end. I mean, obviously you know that, but does that make sense where I'm going there? Like,
yeah.
So what at that time is, what do you attribute that to? Is it, because a lot of it's tied to faith. That's why I brought that up to you. Is it's
yeah, I think for me it was faith in what the future held, and we talked a little bit about that last time, of knowing that this isn't the end, or at least having the faith and confidence that it's not the end, but also going back to even my first deployment, one of the hardest things that I think I saw prior to my first deployment was you talked about the political divisiveness. So obviously, how or why we got ourselves into Iraq can be easily debated.
Yeah.
And I mean, you go back to like how different types of art can be therapeutic for people. I mean, I don't think it's a surprise that a former commander in chief, President George Bush, has spent some of the time that he has in retirement painting portraits of people who gave the ultimate sacrifice in the global war on terrorism, which he was the commander in chief. So we talked about like, where does that level of responsibility stop when it comes to survivor's guilt and everything else? I don't think it's a surprise if you really look at peeling the onion back on President Bush painting portraits of fallen soldiers. Like I think that's an admirable tribute, and probably also a little bit of self-therapy for him, right?
Oh, 100%.
If you look back and just kind of pull that apart. But I just think that, there was the protests and Cindy Sheehan and a lot of folks. And I told my wife and my mother that if you ever drag my name through the mud because I died doing something that I loved, I said, there's only one reason why I would try to come back and haunt you. Right.
You don't want me to come back and haunt you.
And it would be because you dishonored my name and my service for something that I believed in, doing something that I loved, and dishonored that by tainting the memory of me by turning it into a negative narrative. And, I was just at peace with the fact that I was doing what I loved with the people that I loved. And that's a love that transcends anything, chaos, violence, loss. There's people that I still to this day tell that I love, and it just means something different. Right. And, that night when I took stock of everything back in 2012 and knew that we were going to step off the next morning, already knowing the outcome of what happened to Jason Hallbrook and Paul Pena, I just felt like my number was up. There was just a feeling that this could be it, but it was also liberating in the sense that you could lead without restriction, and it was part of it was faith and knowing that I could take every step, knowing that even if this was the end, it wasn't the end. And part of that had to do with my own personal Christian background and faith, but also that I was doing it with the people that I loved and that I had trained with, and that I had borne that hardship and had gone through that crucible together, especially after sharing a day where we went through two separate mass casualty events. It was just a sense of peace washed over me. And I know that Jeff had described that previously, and some of the things that he's discussed. I don't know how else to capture that.
No, you can't. I mean,
but I'm thankful.
That's my dream to get him in here. We gotta. It would be the dream.
I'm thankful that I'm still here.
No,
I mean, that's the other thing is, it does give you perspective on life and the appreciation of life and how valuable it is.
Yeah, and I think what you said before, like in the first couple of minutes to go back, is talked about the 50th anniversary of all volunteer military. Just what you said here in the past, 5 minutes of everybody that we did that with. We all volunteered. We all wanted to do that, and as much as we all complain about the military and things about it, we all wanted to be there. Deep down inside, we all did. We all raised our right hand. We all took an oath. We wanted to do that, and that is important. And that's the thing. Is like there's a. But yeah, you there's a lot of things like I had that thought too, but I'm not a spiritual guy. I mean, I remember a moment that I had where I was crippled with fear. Like it was IEDs. Like I was terrified. That scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And there's a party that's like, you know, it's almost like Lieutenant Dan. People, you make fun of movies and stuff, but that man says, I never thought about my life at 50 years old, how I was going to be dealing with that. Because I thought you were going to go to war, something's going to happen to you. You don't have to deal with life, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think a lot of us feel that way, and I don't know if there's some part of it like you're afterwards. It's kind of like it's bad to say it, but anticlimactic. It's not the right way to say it, but it's kind of like you didn't think you'd be here where you are now, and there's a lot of different things that you're dealing with at 40 years old, 50 years old, like you know, you're having some serious, you know, medical stuff that's going on. I can't hear, like, you know, I didn't, you know, I didn't, you know, prepare myself for this age, but it's just kind of strange that there's some, but it was interesting how casually, why I brought that up is how casually a lot of people just say that, like, there was a point they can definitely identify a point where they were like, okay, I'm okay with this. Like, I may not make it through the night or the hour or the day, but I'm okay.
Well, just to be a little bit objective, what other option is there?
Yeah.
I'm not going to quit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's literally taking that leap of faith, and in an area of Afghanistan where you're literally playing Minesweeper every single day, every step was a leap of faith.
Right.
I mean, you have no other option other than shutting down to put one foot in front of the other, and if you're the leader, quitting's not an option. Guys, right? So that also goes back to the creed. Whether it's the Ranger Creed or the Warrior Creed, I'll never quit. Right? It's just not in our DNA, and it's certainly not.
It's not the American. It's not the American soldier. Any of us, so really, that's what people understand. It's. I can't, you know, it's. I can't think of anybody that really quit. Like, I mean, yeah, we can't, but like, there's so many people that just they didn't, you know, what I mean, and everything, and
self-preservation.
Like, they quit about like marriage, like 2 years without your spouse, not seeing them, you know what I mean? Yeah. Not seeing a kid for a little bit, let's quit. I mean, people have quit, but I mean, it's just it's.
I think people bury that feeling of self-preservation, but it's because of that the fear of failure of letting the person to your left and right that you love so much down, that just gets buried, right? It's one of the reasons why many of us are broken in our 30s and 40s is because we always put ourselves and taking care of ourselves last. And so selfless service has a cost, and but it also helps us endure through those hard times. So perhaps it's a two-edged sword, but when it really matters, I mean, it's not about self-preservation. It's about taking care of the people to your left and right, especially if you're responsible for leading them.
Yeah, and I think the lesson learned of this is that it shouldn't just be in the warrior class. It should be in the world. Like, you should be looking at, you know, that's how you should live your life every day. Whether you're, you know, a painter, you should. The world isn't just about yourself. You have to be looking out for other people. And you know, unfortunately or fortunately, we, you know, as a warrior class, we're thrust into that.
So can I
pretty deeply?
Since we're on this topic, and this is a story that I have very rarely told. In fact, I had a conversation with my wife about her and I talking about this for one of the first times. And this goes back to the 2009 deployment. So 2009, after Rob Sanchez was killed, we were in Kandahar and got moved back to Helmand. And so on, October 26th, I got a text message from the platoon leader that I served with. And this is why it's kind of fresh in my mind, because it was one experience that I think I had not necessarily buried, but I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but it's something that got brought up because he texted me and he was like, "Hey man, do you realize that today is the anniversary of this particular mission?" And it was a mission that I hadn't thought about in years, and it goes back to everything you're talking about. But also, when you talk about love for the people to your left and right, it didn't matter if you knew them or not,
Or they like them.
or that you liked them,
Yeah.
or that they ate crayons or not. And so I want to share this story, and I had no idea you were going to have a crayon cake here, but
which is awesome, by the way.
yeah.
It's a tradition we've
And
done. It's a
some of the best humans I know are Marines, so God bless them all. We had kind of got back in the saddle, so we licked our wounds. We dealt with that worst night of our lives together, and so this is literally 3.5 weeks later. You know, we're back out on a mission, and the mission was to conduct a raid, but the mission changed. We were launching from a forward operating base, and as part of our support for the operation, we had Marines who were the battle space owners in Helmand at the time, were supporting our operation with close combat attack or helicopters that were attack helicopters, which is different for the Army. You had at the time Kiowas were still a thing, right? So you had Apaches and Kiowas that were flying in support of us. But in Helmand, because we had Marines, they had this unique combination of a Cobra and a Huey that were armed to the teeth. And that was their version of CCA for the Marine Corps at the time. And when we took off in our MH-47s, we had issues getting comms with the Marine aircraft. And it wasn't unusual to have conventional aviation units sometimes to have issues with soft units, or I think that night specifically it had something to do with like ComSec roll and it being before or after midnight when we took off. And so I think the fills were different. And
it's always funny to hear you say this because I haven't heard these terms in such a long time. So it's it just flashes you back. So
you know, it was just basically we weren't able to talk to the aircraft. And so our pilots were getting frustrated because they couldn't talk to them. And initially we had delayed launch. And we were getting to a point in the evening where if we didn't launch, we were going to miss our hit time, and assets were aligned. And you know, it's a gas problem at that time for a lot of things. And so we decided to launch. We can't get comms still with the aircraft, and it was kind of like hey, we'll figure it out en route kind of thing. And I'm sitting there, and as a ground force commander, I'm sitting on a cooler towards the front of the aircraft near the hot seat with the air mission commander, and I'm plugged into the headset and I'm watching the feed for the ISR, watching the target. So as I'm sitting on the cooler, I'm staring out the ramp of the back of the aircraft, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this massive fireball comes up from the ground. And at the time, we had these weird intelligence reports about like essentially the equivalent of like a toe popper that the Taliban was trying to build to basically launch IEDs into the air to try to shoot aircraft down. And so the pilots kind of freaked out because they thought someone was trying to target the aircraft. Long story short, we realized that the two helicopters that were supposed to support our operation had actually crashed into each other and collided midair. And so the flight lead said, "Hey, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, we can't go back to the base." They wanted to go pick up CSAR, the Combat Search and Rescue Team. And I said, "You need to put us on the ground so that we can secure the crash site. We don't know what the threat is in the area." I said, you need to set us down so we can secure it." And my point of this story is not to thump our chest or anything. It is purely to highlight Captain Kyle Van de Giesen, who's from North Attleboro, Massachusetts, Captain Eric Jones of Westchester, New York, Captain David Mitchell of Loveland, Ohio, and Corporal Gregory Fleury of Anchorage, Alaska. Those were 4 of the 6 crew members on those 2 aircraft. Now, there were 6 of them. These were the 4 that were killed. We landed and started securing the crash site. And in the midst of all of this going on, the air assets that were flying in support of the operation said, we see movement around the crash site, which indicated that there were survivors. And without skipping a beat, the Rangers that were on the ground immediately started moving towards the crash site to identify the people that were still alive. And with the fire still going, with rounds from the armament cracking off, these Rangers ran towards the fire, towards the crash site, and pulled 2 of these guys out. And when you talk about love, when you talk about pride, when you talk about doing hard things for the sake of other people to your left and right that don't even wear the same camouflage as you, that are supporting you overseas, you've never trained with them before. I didn't know these people from Adam, but to be there at the casualty collection point and to watch these Rangers just immediately go into action, pull these 2 guys out, triage them, and then to stay at that crash site until we had recovered all 6 of the remains, alive or dead, to get them out, to get those 2 people treated, to get them evacuated, to get them to a cache, and then to account for the remains of the other 4 people that were there in the crash site. And then to hand that over to the Marine ground QRF that relieved us at the crash site to continue recovery of things like sensitive items. We get back to the base and there is a all hands call for blood because one of the people that survived ended up losing a leg and was not in good shape, and they needed units of blood. And then to see the same strike force get off of the aircraft, throw their gear in the ready room, and then immediately go over to the hospital to get in line to give blood to keep these people alive. It was a mission that I forgot about until Eric, a West Point classmate of mine, who was the platoon leader, sent me an article that I just read from. But it's an incredibly proud moment in the midst of an incredibly chaotic situation. And when you talk about love and you talk about service and sacrifice and what veterans sign themselves up for, those are the types of things that you may never envision yourself in a situation like that. But to just be the person to be the ground force commander, to be there to just assist with orchestrating it, and to see the amount of action and initiative and care and love that people that may not know who those people are, but respect them for the service and the obligation that they sign themselves up for, and to ensure that they're brought back in the most respectful manner possible, whether alive or dead. I almost felt bad about not thinking about it over the past couple of years until Eric had brought it up, because I remember specifically having PCS from Alaska to Savannah to serve in 1st Ranger Battalion as we were working on going through the remains and the wreckage. The 23-year-old corporal that I mentioned from Anchorage, Alaska, like many of us that carry certain things overseas, whether it's an American flag or whatnot, we found an Alaska state flag in the wreckage, and we brought it back and made sure that it got to the unit commander so that they could hand that off to the family. So I know that that's probably not a war story that we discussed previously, but in the wake of Veterans Day and service and what it means to serve honorably, I have truly had the opportunity to serve with people that I would call my heroes. And it's reasons like that just makes me incredibly proud to be a part of this community. And while I'm still active duty, to just be around veterans and to honor that day in any way that I can, whether it's talking to business groups or being on a podcast. Or, today we honored 296 veterans that are part of the construction crew that's building the new hospital at the Wexner Center at Ohio State. It's incredibly impossible to say no to anything that has to do with that, right?
So all your sports, like, so just say no. You're like, yeah, we're doing it.
Yeah, it's but they lean into it, and I love them for it.
Oh, you have to. I mean, but it's a good. I will tell you, it's one of the it's. I look at know what I know about the military, and I know about your career and all these kinds of things. I've talked off camera about this, but there's things that I can like look at you and see, like uniform wise. Like I looked at one of your pictures sitting there on the side, as someone's talking. My thing is, like, I think we touched on this a little bit the last time you're here, is where do you think you're making the biggest impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of ties into all these things that I listen to and talk about. But it's like my first thing is like, why the fuck aren't you a brigade commander somewhere or a battalion commander? First of all, battalion commander, let's start there. But and we talk more later. I learned that you got some health stuff going on,
sure.
but still, honestly, could be. I have no doubt that you could still be making an impact, right?
Yeah.
And the things you've done, the experiences you have to be continued to go on as a brigade commander, I think, and it's just it's interesting. You watch people that you begin to like love and respect, and I do love you and respect you, like a lot of my friends I've seen. But like the more I sit back and learn about you, I'm like, this dude is making a huge impact on the next generation, and that's super important. Like just early in the year, our professor of military science passed away, who Colonel Tim Donovan from Norwich, and like this guy is, the same way I guarantee your cadets look at you now, we looked at him, and it's like there's a legacy that you're carrying on that it's important. So like, you keep pushing the envelope, then make them do what they don't want to do. They're gonna down the road, they're gonna have even the active duty guys, gals you have in your department. It makes a huge impact, but then because they're going to go on and probably a lot of those your field grades and your company grade officers are going to leave and go back to the regular Army, but you're sending the next level of leadership that I think was what made I look back at what made us special is a former Ranger Regiment NCO Sergeant Major Mott and Colonel Donovan is who shaped the future of our school for a long time and shaped us as leaders as we went. And some of them are still serving. I think we have one that's a general in my class, one behind me that's about to be a general. So but have went on and done amazing things. So keep making them do those things. They're important. Especially this past week, they should be just as exhausted as you are. As you.
I know that.
Yeah.
But I think Jay, one of the things you talked about as far as like why, and I've always tried to impress this upon my wife, but one of the things when you talk about she as a selfless servant of our family has taken a back seat to my career when she opted to get out after 8 years instead of me getting out,
right?
Because that could have been an option. When you talk about impact and where I was when we came here, it was a realization that I really needed to reprioritize my family. And where my wife has had the most impact is, I've always told her, I might have an impact at work, but she's having an impact at home. And I wanted to have more of a proactive impact on my kids moving forward. And one of the reasons why we opted to stay in Columbus and homestead here is I wanted to be more involved in my kids' lives than what I've been able to. And perhaps I could have done that by staying on the hamster wheel when it came to brigade, battalion, and command and beyond. But I saw a lot of opportunities here to be able to do that, perhaps in a more strategic way. that gave us some great opportunities, especially with school districts and opportunities for the kids. So my 12-year-old daughter wants to try wrestling this year. She did field hockey. She played in the 6th grade band last night in her concert. And so my 10-year-old daughter's soccer team just won their league championship and their playoff weekend last week. My son's starting his 3rd year of wrestling, which probably would have never happened had we not moved to Ohio. My 5-year-old is just going to continue to give me problems for probably the rest of her life, just based on the free spirit that she is. But, I think one of the tipping points for me, to be honest with you, was when I got home from my last deployment that I did in 2020. Mariah was probably about 2.5 years old, and it wasn't her fault, of course, but I was a stranger in my own house when I got home. And it was, I think, the 5th deployment I had done in 2.5 years that she had been alive. And the thing that crushed me the most coming here was we bought a house up here, and I moved the family up here in early June, but then went back to Benning to the regiment with some of the operational stuff that was going on at the time. So I didn't get back here until the end of July. But over the time prior to moving them up here, I had my back surgery. And so I was non-deployable for almost 6 months. And so spent a lot of time at the house on con leave and rehab and, not necessarily doing the super early morning PT sessions because I was doing other stuff with physical therapy. And so I had more opportunities, especially during COVID, to be at the house with the family, teleworking, that kind of stuff. And so I had actually built a pretty decent relationship with my youngest daughter that I didn't have with some of my older kids. And then I got here and I'd only been gone for 6 weeks. And the way that she treated me when I got back here, it was almost like I'd hit the reset button, and it crushed me in a way that it hadn't really affected me before. And it really kind of put some things in perspective in conjunction with watching Afghanistan implode due to some policy decisions that made it extremely difficult on both the personal and professional life to really look at battalion command as like a really good thing for me to pursue at the time versus what I had staring me in the face,
right?
Which is an incredible program in the Army RTC at Ohio State with almost 200 cadets and 4 kids and a wife at home that really needed my attention that I hadn't been able to provide. So I think we all sacrifice in different ways. And I think that is probably, and we have the month of the military child and, that kind of stuff. But man, one of the things that you just touched on that I think is often overlooked is veterans are appreciated, and 10% discount here and there, and free Applebee's and all that kind of stuff, which is awesome that there's corporations that do that kind of stuff around Veterans Day, free haircuts and all that. I think if you ask a lot of veterans or active duty service members, the recognition that they want to see isn't necessarily tied to them, their accolades, the thank you for your service that you talked about, where you just kind of feel awkward about the exchange. Like, what do you say? Do you say thank you back? Do you say you're welcome? Do you say my pleasure? That kind of stuff.
What did we learn a long time ago? Somebody said they started saying you're worth it. Somebody said that.
Sure.
Like,
that's fine.
We talked about that a lot. I just so I can't, but like, it's awkward if you're really honest with it. Like, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it is. It's like, it's awkward, right?
Yeah, but I think that the recognition that I think most people would want to see is to the spouses and kids.
100%.
I mean, the military families, because they're the ones that have sacrificed, that didn't raise their right hand. They never enlisted. They didn't opt into this. They just fell into it, and it just became a family burden that everybody carried. And we've both had our SAW experience, so understanding how trauma gets carried home and absorbed by those that we love, whether we want it to or not. It's just one of those things where everybody in the family shares that hardship in
They
different
take it with love, right?
capacities. And they take it with love, and they live the life of a military brat, and they adapt and they absorb, and they are, my kids are extremely resilient, and I am incredibly proud. Love all of them. They also have carried a lot of stuff that most kids don't have to. And I think that that's often the recognition that means the most to the military and veteran community is recognizing the families, not necessarily recognizing the individual service of the person, right? Because if you make it all about you, like you said, that guilt has a tendency of creeping in because it's not honoring those that didn't come home. It's not honoring your family. It casts a spotlight on you, and that's not the reason why any of us raised our right hand to do this.
Oh, true, 100%. It's a maybe we should start a veterans family there. Maybe this is what we need to get on the calendar. I mean, you were good with the writing. We can make this happen, but I gotta say something about you. The choice you made. I'm glad you made that choice. I would have never met you, most likely, and out of selfish thing, I'm glad to have met you, to share some stories with you, have you as a friend.
Yeah.
And so in a selfish way, I'm glad you did what you did. So let's go to the second featured whiskey. You're looking like you can finish that, and then we'll get into let's talk. You brought up Saul. We'll talk about Saul.
Let's do it
a little bit.
Okay.
So second favorite whiskey, I got lazy too. You got lazy, I got lazy. So I was taking your leadership move. I stay with Boone County. This is the first time you're the first second guest I've had, and you picked the same whiskey. So I picked the same distiller like you did. So I went with Boone County. I think I upped it up a little bit on you though, but it's okay. But so I went with all the people behind the scenes can't wait to drink this, which is fun. I can't wait for Mike to drink this as well. But I went with Boone County because Mike was like, he's gonna be lazy. I'm gonna be lazy. I like it, but no, we talked about it before. But no, I'm joking around. No, I'm kidding around. No, when you do these things, it's always fun to do that. And the funny thing is, I'm also torn about what we're doing is like how much. And we'll talk about Saul a little bit, and I'll elaborate on it a little bit after that. But Boone County is located in Florence, Kentucky, just across the border. Distillery's roots go back to 1833. When the Peterson Distillery was founded by William Snyder. In 1869, the distillery was sold to Freeburg and Workman, who grew it into one of the largest producers of whiskey in Kentucky by the 1880s. And by 1910, the distillery had been shut down due to lack of visitors to the town of Petersburg, and the final reserves were sold off in about 1910. And a lot of it had to do with the way transportation was going. A lot of people weren't heading that way. So in 2015, two Boone County residents, Josh Quinn and Jack Wells, established the Boone County Distilling Company, and bourbon was once again distilled and brought back to Boone County. The brand's ethos is made by ghosts, which is also that's one of the best names out there. This is a nod to the early pioneers who crafted spirits in Boone County for over 137 years. Also, its logo has a number 8 linking the words Boone and County. And the last time when you were here, I didn't even realize that how many bottles I drank. I was like, oh shit, I never noticed that. But once you see it, you can't forget it. It's like one of those things, you see it.
Yeah.
You can't. I never noticed that until I researched this a few months ago. And the registered distillery is 8, is a designation for the Petersburg Distillery. The DSP Kentucky 8 designation now belongs to Four Roses. So it's kind of their way to get back to their tie. They can't get the 8 back. Last time we were here, I think we had like a 7-year or something. Like they're kind of the opposite of what we did tonight with their own distillate. So now we're going back to the source stuff that they sourced, which was phenomenal. Like everyone's looking at. So this is Boone County 1833 10-year straight bourbon whiskey. It's 10 years old, 90.8 proof. The mash bill 75% corn, 20% rye, and 4% malted barley. And if you're wondering, it's from MGP. So cheers.
Cheers. Let's do it.
These guys are salivating to get hold of it. Don't give it to the Marines. Okay. So close to the proof, I'm interested. If you had any of the old MGP stuff, you're kind of newer into it.
No.
Let's see what you think about it.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll keep next time we have him on, he's going to come up with some crazy bird sound stuff. I'm going to have to bust out a 12-year single barrel Boone County. We can keep it going for a long time. So let's talk about you know, a lot of things of. We're now probably like 3.5 hours of talking and content.
Sure.
A lot of stuff. I think you've told some amazing stories, not just war stories, but some other stuff. But like one of the things you shared with you talk about is like you reached your breaking point. I think a lot of happened with family stuff.
Yep.
The pullout in 2021. You probably weren't feeling too good about yourself, just like many of us haven't. So both of us are now graduates or alumni of Save a Warrior, which is a pretty amazing organization that's not too far from here in Hillsborough, Ohio.
Yep.
So you showed me the way you were. One of my former guests was the first person to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank you on the air now in front of you. You were the reason why I decided to have the courage to fill out that questionnaire and talk about it and be honest about where I was in my life. And sometimes it takes, like some people have already posted, like, I didn't realize what you were at the time, but thank you for being a whale, right?
Yeah.
Like, we'll know that term is, a lot of people won't, but thank you for that. And so I think it's a good time to talk about it. So like,
Sure.
that's different experiences. We have another alumni down here with us. And it means a lot. So, and what it is like, we can read do we read about what Save Warrior is first, and then we talk?
Yeah,
do we
let's
get?
do it.
Well, let's do the blurb about it.
Sure.
Not blurb, but like what Save a Warrior is. And we've talked about this before a few times, but now I feel like as a graduate, I can talk about it, or alumni. But Save a Warrior is the original warrior-led, timeless, heroic journey for active duty military, returning veterans, and first responders who feel desperately alone. They offer an alternative holistic service that equips veterans, military personnel, police, firefighters, and other first responders with a community of support and effective techniques to overcome the symptoms of addiction associated with complex post-traumatic stress. And hopefully we can talk about that a little bit more after we get done. And Save a Warrior believes in challenging conventional thinking. The way they challenge the idea of suicide is so novel and so inspiring. It connects the lives of all who have transformed from sharing in this experience. Since 2012, those who have completed Save a Warrior claim that this unique approach to ordinary saved their life. And to quote Jake Clark, who we've all met, who's one of probably the most intense people we've met. I've read his quote before, and like it doesn't feel the same as the first time reading it. But he said, "Give us 72 hours, and we'll change the way you see and live your life." And I have to thank you for being the whale, and I have to thank Jake Clark, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, for the project.
Yeah,
Godspeed the project, and I think we should talk about that a little bit about post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
It's important, like, we all, it's all different things, and there's two parts of it, like, that we all go into it. There's we're not going to get too deep into, we had this discussion earlier about what do we talk about?
Sure.
Like, how do we tell people that are listening or that aren't part of it? How do we bring them in and not make them feel excluded or ruin the experience that we went through? Does that make sense?
Yeah. If I could take a crack at it, I think complex post-traumatic stress not only addresses the acknowledgement that we have experienced things as service members in combat, but that there are many people in the military who carry things into their time of service from their childhood that aren't properly addressed before they put a uniform on. And I think I personally had
formative trauma
that I think
moral injury, the two things you're talking about.
Yep, formative trauma and moral injury due to our combat experiences. That I had a conversation with Jay Clark over the phone one time about this. And one of the things I explained to him was, having gone to SAW and overlaid that with the time that I've been the professor of military science at Ohio State, and without naming names or personal examples or anything, there have been a number of cadets sitting on my couch in my office that have poured their hearts out to me to what Saul would call the non-shareable problems. And the realization.
Before you go, we call them that, but everybody has them. So non-shareables are something that has happened to you in your life that you feel like you have to go to the grave with. Right?
Yeah,
that's non-shareable.
It could be
like you don't feel comfortable telling anybody about your spouse, your brother. Non-shareables, like that's what that means. So yes.
Yeah, and arguably the thought process with Saul is the non-shareable problems that you decide to take to your grave is potentially what actually leads you to your grave, right? And so you've already touched on it in the conversation. It's having the ability to share your stories with others, to open up and talk about some of that stuff. Perhaps some of it is those moral injuries or those experiences that you've had overseas that you need to share with a brother or sister in arms or a fellow veteran. But some of it perhaps is not. Some of it is perhaps family based or background based. And, I've witnessed people who have had problems just in my last couple of years, where it's family related, or it is associated with a bad experience with a daycare worker or a grandparent, whether it is physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, hands around people's necks, or sexual assault of people that they trusted the most in their life, who let them down in the most catastrophic way. And then they carry that into uniform. And we wonder why
we kill ourselves at a astronomical rate.
Yeah. And so, and again, without naming names, there's a former brigade commander who had a slew of suicides in his brigade, and he made the unpopular declaration at the time that completely makes sense to me now after having gone through Saul, that the majority of the people in the brigade that were taking their own life had not even deployed to combat. And that was a wildly unpopular thing to say out loud at the time. But when you peel the onion back, whether it's undiagnosed mental health issues or things that people have just kept bottled up, that, like I alluded to earlier, just eat you from the inside out. There are things that metastasize themselves. And then when you overlay that with perhaps just the stress and anxiety of the potential to deploy, let alone deploying itself, and then having some of those experiences that we've shared in these discussions that can compound those issues and make the mental health of an individual become even more destabilized than what it was previously. You're kind of looking at what you could probably easily say is a recipe for disaster when it comes to someone's mental health, and what could easily become a deterioration of something that leads someone down the road to at least the entertainment of suicide as an option, right?
Yeah.
And of course, conversations like this is to encourage people to seek help that they need,
right?
And to not encourage it or condone it, but to raise awareness for it, so that we appreciate the problem for how complex it is and how many layers of the onion that you peel back, right? Like my veteran speech, when I talked about this with the chronic brain injury program at Ohio State, was it's not just the acknowledgement that I've had a couple of concussions from playing football in high school and college. I've had 4 brain injuries in service, 3 in combat from an IED, a hand grenade, and an RPG. as well as a jump. So that's, if you're counting, that's at least 6 concussions or brain injuries that I've sustained from 17 until, my 30s. But it's also carrying radios and amplifiers on our backs for years overseas. It is having to rotate seats in a vehicle, because if your soldiers sit next to the jammer for infill and exfil, they end up vomiting when you get back to the fob because of whatever is emitted from the jammer.
What's coming?
And it's burn pits and burning our own excrement, 15 meters away from the same place that we're eating and sleeping, and burning our own trash, and the poop pond at Kandahar Airfield.
You're like one of the few people that understand that.
Yeah.
Is it the craziest?
My wife knows all about the poop pond too.
I can't wait. The Meg's coming on soon. Like there was actually a comedian, Artie Lang, that talked about that, who's on the Howard Stern show. He went over there, and like, if you have not been there, people think you're fucking kidding. Like, remember when you'd run? I don't know if you guys were allowed to run around.
Yeah,
like,
run around the loop.
Like, my company area was
like
my company was downwind from that, so it would like drift towards you. Yeah. Like, but you'd run by, and everyone's like, and actually when I was there, and people like, I like to exaggerate stories a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It is who I am a little bit, right? It's my my racket, right? But when I was there, a Romanian soldier tried to swim across that for a bet, and the dude got medevaced out of there. It was like, and I told the story. People were like, "You're full of shit." Google it, look at it. Already, if you talk about, he heard that story too. He's like, he was crazy. He was like, he remembered seeing that, and somebody told that story. This dude, some of his buddies bet him a lot of money to try to swim across the ship pond. Like, and the ship pond wasn't small either.
No,
how big do you think that was? Because I haven't talked about the ship pond in a good 12 years.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But people think I'm just glad to know it's still there, and everybody else is suffering like we did. But it was a pretty good size.
I mean, I'm pretty sure it's gone now, but yeah, it's
probably a good over 100 yards.
Yeah, and it was. I used to have a T-shirt that said "Poop Pond Lifeguard." But
we got to remake that.
But it's
John Burke who made this shirt. He can make us one of those. I think he can do it.
Getting back to the
I love how we got. So that's
sorry.
We have to. That's a good thing to talk about. It's funny, but
but when you get back to, when you try to peel the layers of the onion back of someone's ability to diagnose what is wrong with a veteran, right? You talk about formative trauma, you talk about moral injury, you talk about burn pits, you talk about exposure to other environmental factors like people burn tires in cobble to keep warm. You talk about jammers and radios and amplifiers and satellites and everything else. Like, I still am convinced to this day that all of those things combined is going to be some form of cancer that's like our generation's Agent Orange that we haven't yet fully realized yet. And so when you talk about, there was a time in my life where I was at peace with dying because I was convinced that my number was up and that I was comfortable with that. But there's also a form of ruminating now as I'm 41 and semi-broken and just trying to like maintain things when it comes to quality of life, that you ask yourself these hard questions of what is my quality of life going to be in the future? And in my speech that I talked about on Monday, it was, am I going to be around to walk my 3 daughters down the aisle? At what point do I potentially develop dementia because of all the things that I've been exposed to or the brain injuries that I've sustained? I think one of the things that you don't ever want to be in the future is a burden to your family, especially as the person who's prided themselves on being the breadwinner and that kind of stuff, right? So, I mean, that can be humbling in and of itself. And unfortunately, the wounded warriors that we know are already living with that and having to deal with that because of the wounds that they've sustained overseas. And you see that, and it's hard to process and understand and appreciate, specifically those that are outside the community. But it's just so hard to diagnose that when you're trying to pull all that apart at the same time and come up with some semblance of a coherent diagnosis for someone. And so while there are challenges with the VA and with healthcare and access and that kind of stuff, it's also incredibly challenging, I think, as from a doctor's perspective, to look at one of us and say,
Dude, they must look at us and think we're fucking crazy.
I know what the root cause of the problem is for that guy, right? Like, it's just, my frustration is always, I feel like I'm constantly having symptoms treated rather than the root cause.
Yeah.
But from a medicinal perspective, what truly is the root cause? Is it mental? Is it physical? Is it something else?
I mean, we have different experience. Like we talk about, we could probably talk for hours, and I know there's some fellow SAL members, and like we're not going to get into the details about it, but one of the things I'm going to go on air about and say is, I was the guy who was like, I've said it. I think we have 90 hours of content. I'm like, I'm not going to go talk to. I talked to a shrink for probably 20. Let's just say 20 hours, right? And then can't tell me how many times my wife has said to me, or other people said to me, you need to go talk to somebody. And I was like, fuck you. I don't need to go talk to anybody. What's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not going to go talk to some shrink.
Yeah.
And then I thrust myself into the project, and I went through 72 hours of some pretty intense.
Yeah.
Not led by medical people, but warrior led. That's the kind of the thing to talk about. So
someone who has served and someone who has sat in the same seat as you, which I think is a completely different experience.
It's huge. And that's the thing as I'm trying to say before, like there's a part about listening. Like there's definitely, like, we cannot do this on our own. One of the things I've learned here in a long time, is as Poison Patriots has went on, is like, as we started this from a podcast, my basement, to a 501c3, is like, we cannot leave this to just the military guys doing ourselves, because if we do it, it's not going to reach its full potential.
Yeah.
Right. But there's a part of like can listen, but when you start talking to other people, which is what I think is great about Saul, right? What I learned about is like you're the people that have been there before. It's like I used to think my suffering, right, was special, and I've told some of these people in this basement, I felt I was special about that, and I'm not. Yeah. Like, it's not. So if I listen to people that share that and understand it, and don't pass judgment. It's one of the first times in a long time I could say something where I don't look somebody in the eyes and I'm worried about what I just said.
Yeah.
And it makes me feel like you can look like it's, what I'm talking about. Like it's if you haven't been through it, it doesn't matter. But like it's where you first time you could say how you feel, right? You can share something and really believe in the first time that nobody's looking at you and saying, holy shit, you are fucked up. Like, honestly, that's how I felt in that, and then my thing about this, we could talk about this hour, is the one thing about it, as we went through the two parts of what PTS is, which I think you and I both were on some journeys, like, before we went there, right?
Sure.
So there's different parts, and we'll talk about like where, some people are done suffering, they're not.
Yep.
I was done suffering. I've been looking for, something to bring it all together for me. And that's what Saul was.
Yep.
Honestly, I'm thankful for that. It was something that, like, holy shit, these things I understood, but like somebody just like,
you gave
literally
clarity.
walked up and punched you, just punched you right in the stomach.
Yeah.
Got your attention, said, here, like, listen, like, for the first time, you're like, listen. So, but what I come out of it as is understanding a lot, but as far as the military goes, with formative trauma, right? What I'm struggling with now, and I haven't shared this, so I wanted to say this to you on the air, is I'm struggling with the military kind of preys on people like you and I have formative trauma. If you talk about how many of us have formative trauma, and for the people who aren't listening, from 0 to 18, the things that have happened to you, it's crazy how much we've suffered up to our first 18 years of life, all those things we suffered, all the things we experienced, and we thrust ourselves back into the next level of it to like let's get a shit sandwich, but like put another layer on it, formative trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. If I could maybe perhaps spin it in a little bit more of an optimistic view on that.
Different look. No, it's
a different look. Some of us go to the military to find that community. And so in some aspect, I think you find a support group of like-minded people, not in the sense of groupthink, but in the sense of people that perhaps need some healing.
Right.
And come from hard backgrounds. And I've seen that with some of, I mean, even in my own program with some of the cadets, they have gone to a program where they find community in a place outside their bloodline. And they know that if they go home, they're going to fall into the same pitfalls and the same traps that some of their family members have fallen into, whether that's violence, gangs, prison, whatever else it may be. And so the military, for some people, I think becomes an outlet for that, and a community of people that share similar backgrounds and experiences. And it truly becomes a family that they've never had, right? Like I've had cadets that have written me thank you notes, or everything to up to and including like you're the closest thing I've ever had to a father figure, right? Like you're the closest thing I've ever had to someone who has modeled the right behavior that I wanted to see in someone, in an adult mentor. It's a compliment to you, not necessarily a compliment to their upbringing, right? But I agree with you, whether it's predatory or not.
I'm playing. The next part is what I tell you is that I knew you'd handle that perfectly. It's perfect that you'd handle that and hit it out of the park. The other part about it is like, here's what I came out of that is like, here's the part of all that is the world needs us. Yeah. So all the things that I went through in formative trauma, dude, it's made us who we are, and we have found our tribe. We found what is important to us. Yeah. All those things that are missing in the world, right? Of all the things that happen to us in formative trauma, and I challenge everybody. Mike and I made a commitment that we're not going to go deep into what it means, but if you don't know what formative trauma is, you should look at it. You should research it, and you should take a deep breath and look at yourself and in your life. I firmly believe that wholeheartedly. But like to quote almost like the horrible Batman thing, but like a lot of us were raised in darkness, and we were comfortable in it, and they need the world needs us. But like you look at how the love that it comes out for each other, and like the things that we all have made it through, and not just military people, but warriors, first responders, all those kind of people. Like the world needs us, and a lot of people think they don't. I would not change one part of my growing up.
Yeah.
Not one fucking thing. Not one. Yeah. Not one thing, because it made me who I am, and that's the important thing to remember. And for a long time, a few weeks ago, I didn't think that he's here down here. I'm looking at my dad right now. I wouldn't change one thing, because it made me who I am, and the world needs us. So it's that balance. I knew you would do that, but it's like, yeah, it is like they pray. I said that word as a prayer. I don't think it's the right word, but it's. I feel like it's my calling. You know what I mean? Yeah, we're made for this, and yeah, that's what happened, right? That's kind of
that's what happened.
Yeah,
it's but it's important to understand. I think that if not us, then who, right? And I love the tradition of Ohio State. For those that can't visually see me, they might not. They might be surprised that I'm a big Ohio State fan.
And we haven't talked. Before you get into that, we have not talked about Army kicking the shit out of Air Force.
Oh yeah, that's great.
I mean, how great was that?
Oh yeah, it was. I was out on our field training exercise.
Sorry to do it really, but that's
no, we were on land lab, so I got all these great texts from all my West Point buddies and my family and stuff, and it at first I didn't take it serious because I wasn't sure if it was
You're like, there's no way we're beating Air Force.
I'm like, okay, all right, I guess someone knows that I'm out in the field and can't watch TV right now, so
someone's fucking with you. Yeah, exactly.
Like, I don't know, but it's I had this unique opportunity this past year to sign myself up for what's called a step mentor. So it's basically to try to dive in more a little bit into the community of Ohio State, and then the community and the faculty, and just be more a part of a campus feel. I became a mentor to a group of sophomores on campus, a group of 14 students. And the goal of the program is to, studies have shown that if sophomores don't feel connected, dropout rates increase. And, for corporate, for the university, it's healthy because you have the opportunity to maintain the people that are on campus to stay. But it really has given me a great opportunity to get to know some other students on campus, and has really been a great opportunity to get to know some other people outside of the department and the cadets and everything else. But it just really, I think for me, has built a sense of connectiveness and community that I didn't necessarily have before. And one of the things when I talked to them about it was identity, right? And so we talked about identity in the sense of what defines us. And so one of the things as a visual that I brought to them was, and I'll tie this back to veterans, is I brought my tan beret to the discussion, and not necessarily in like a show and tell manner or that kind of thing to like bow up on a bunch of sophomores in college, but it was to show them. I brought the tan beret, and then I brought a hat that had an Ohio State logo on it, and I said, for much of my career, 9 of the 18 months that I've served in uniform, I've worn a tan beret. And so for half of my Army life, I've defined myself as a Ranger, right? And so that has, in some aspects, become an identity of who I am. But one of the things that Ohio State has provided me the opportunity to do is to define myself in a way where I am now becoming a part of a community where I can wear a Block O and define myself as a part of a community that is different than a tan beret. It's not to forget that time period,
right,
but it has afforded me an opportunity to take on an identity that doesn't define me by who I have been in the past. I think living the Ranger Creed is a lifelong mission, and it's something that will continue to be a part of me. With the crayon cake sitting in front of us, I'm not offended by you describing me as a former Army Ranger, but as the Marines would say, once a Marine, always a Marine. Right. I think being a Ranger will always be a part of me, right? But now I have the opportunity to define myself in a different capacity as the professor of military science, as a faculty member of Ohio State, as a member of the community that still cares and invests in the military and veteran community. It's just in a different capacity than what I've been able to do in the past.
No, 100%. When I say that, like, I think that when the Marine Corps does that new thing in offensive, like, listen, I understand that we're always who you are, right? Mm-hmm. But the big thing I think in military people is since you've come on, one of the questions I've asked, because you're not out yet, and I'm not going to ask it to you. So hopefully we can talk about this on there or
Part 3
or part 7 or whatever. But it just, having a cigar in the backyard. But the big thing, I think one of the big things was that is our identity, who we are. Like, we were convinced that this is the most important thing we've done in our life. And it's been some of the most important, most impactful things. Dude, I hope you do listen to this again and listen to like the impact you have, because dude, like, I mean this with all of love, but like, the impact you're making right now in the Columbus community and the impact at the Ohio State University is just as a bigger impact as a professor of military science.
Mm-hmm.
A Ranger Regiment guy, but you're making a bigger impact. It's a different identity. Yeah. Like, you're now an identity of a dad. Like, you're a dad, you're a coach. Yeah. All those things, that's the problem. Is a lot of us, we don't ever let that go. That's who our identity is, and that's what we were. Like, yeah, of course, it's who we always will be. Yeah. But it's not who we have to be right now. We can change our identity. Yep. Right. Like that's I think that's one of the things we forget is, like, it's so impactful. It's so emotional. It's so raw. It's like everything that we ever want. The number thing is, it's what we always wanted. That's why I say, like you said in the start of the podcast, it's like everybody that's a veteran now, it's what you fucking wanted. If you didn't want that, well, you did, but like, it's something that, it's the one thing that you wanted the most for most of us. And then at some point in time, you're not there yet. It goes away. That part of you that you wanted most is to be a ranger is gone. Yeah.
Well, and so for those that perhaps are listening to this conversation that aren't in the military, right, or maybe are considering service in the military, I've never met a veteran who said, "I wish I had never served." But how many people have you met in your lifetime that will give you the story about all the different reasons why they didn't put the uniform on?
Yeah.
Everyone has a story about, "I would have served, but," right? And after the but becomes the story. But I've yet to run into a veteran that said that my time in uniform didn't positively impact me for the rest of my life, that despite the scars that we carry, the moral injury, all of that stuff, like you said, I wouldn't go back and change a thing. I would go back. I would serve in the same units. I would opt into the same opportunities. I would serve with the same people. I wouldn't change anything. Yeah. Right. And for the people that are out there, that for Pours of Patriots and for raising awareness for suicide prevention, this is a week to celebrate being proud of the time that you served in uniform, whether it's Vietnam veteran that did not receive the same level of respect that we received when we came home, thankfully, right, for our generation. To those that are perhaps still searching for a little bit of meaning in the wake of the implosion of Afghanistan or Iraq, and some of my own personal frustrations with the connection of service and policy and outcomes, right? But we have done the best we could in some of the hardest situations, and you have to be proud of that. You have to. Yeah. And I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't go back and change anything. I made some personal dumb decisions in my own life, but like when it comes to service, I would go back and change anything. It has made me who I am today, like you said, just like my background has made me who I am today. You know?
No, it's such into like the next level. Like, one of the things is there's a lot. I'm kind of mad that you didn't give me this before the speech. I know you did it on purpose to look at what you did. It's like there's a lot of things like it torn up. Mike literally gave me like 15 minutes to dissect a speech you gave. And I'm like, damn it. And everyone's coming to talk to my dad. I'm like, leave me alone. Like, it's fine. But yeah, I mean, I never thought about that too, but there are, if you're talking about veterans, they'll talk about how bad the suck is, the suck of this and that. But yeah, I've never like, I mean, if you deep down and deep dive, there's some people that really the military wasn't for them. But yeah, like for the most part, we wouldn't change what we've done. I mean, it's who we are, it's who we've become. But why I said that is I think an important thing is, you're still living our dream, man. You really are. Like you're living our dream. And what I mean by the dream is as an officer, right? Like I get a lot of shit and I'm gonna look at these guys and listen to guys like, you're fucking leading people, man. You're making impact. That's what I joined the military to do. That's what I was made proud of. Like whether it's a 35-year-old, E7 Ranger Regiment guy who's has more deployments than you, has more medals than you. Like you let him, like you're leading these young men and women you're leading them to like join the military. I mean, some of them will go active duty, some won't. Some won't even get the opportunity, but they're not going to forget who you are.
Sure.
And so like I'm kind of jealous. Like I think as a person that's out of the game for a long time, you still live our dream. So keep living our dream.
Yeah.
And most importantly, I didn't see this a long time, but you're there for your family. Your family's a priority. Again, everything about what you're doing right now is huge. Like the impact you're making on cadets, the impact you're making on other students, impact you're making on your family, which you made an impact before, but maybe not the best impact, right? Now it's a better impact. So keep living the dream for us. And keep it going, man.
So can we perhaps close with the introductory stuff?
Yeah. No, that's what's going to go. So we have a lot of, there's so many things we can unpack tonight. Like we're getting to 2:20. I don't give a shit. You can always pause. I learned today you can pause YouTube and come back to it after you go do your job that you're supposed to be done. No, I don't care how long it goes. It's just, we got to let them things flow. So, all joking aside, we'll get into some other things about the Marine Corps birthday is tomorrow. But this weekend is it's a huge weekend, and we give Marines a hard time, but I think when I look back at it, I'm glad the Marines' birthday is where it is, because it gets everybody's mind in check. Like it brings everybody from, they will bring it from this big to this big, and then everybody else will open it up to what it's about. So, I mean, if you don't know, Veterans Day is coming up. Is very close. So Mike has been doing a lot of stuff. Mike gave a speech Monday. He's actually going to give a speech here Saturday morning. I'm hoping I can make that to hear that.
We'd love to have you.
I'm gonna try my best to make it there. I'm gonna be there. I'm not gonna try, but one of the things that as we get into Veterans Day is that Veterans Day is passed on. Like I'm super blessed to be fortunate enough to be down in the basement right now with my brothers, right? So and my brothers and my father, which is kind of because my dad is my brother. He's my brother in arms. And it's a special time for us. It's a time for us to reflect on our service and things like that. So, I look back, and what's interesting about what I read is like, I look at my dad and a lot of people, what you say about you were talking about being down here with a Vietnam veteran and all this kind of stuff. Like my dad can annoy the shit out of me about being a Vietnam veteran now in today's world, but it's a lineage. He's the one that showed me the way. He's the one that, like, honestly is like, like his suffering and what he didn't get when he came home, it definitely has been pushed to us, which is what we talked about always, like the yin and yang, or the good and bad. So this is definitely the weekend to fuck the Marines, to be honest with you. Like we had the cake, but it's all about, this week is all about us. And one of my biggest pet peeves, and I don't talk about this, is like tomorrow's Veterans Day, right? Or like Saturday's Veterans Day. Yep. Like every veteran in the United States should have tomorrow off, and it doesn't happen. Like it's so crazy. It's one of the weirdest things I think about is like some of the some of the guys like, I have tomorrow off. But what I mean is like, so I'm gonna read something. So like I'm fortunate in my family to have my dad who was a few generations ahead of me in this and being a veteran, and Mike has shared some stuff with you. But I'm going to read something he shared with this group on Monday. So, and it's pretty. I'm somehow you didn't give me this before to like dissect this a little bit, but he said some aspects of war transcend time. A soldier's mind is one of them. A few years ago, my grandfather gave me a stationary notepad. My great-grandfather, William Ake, carried during his time serving in the U.S. Army in World War I. Going through it, I found some priceless heirlooms, including a Bible, a patch from his uniform, and a photo of him with my great-grandmother next to his Harley after he came home. But creased up in the back, I found a piece of paper likely to be overlooked by most. It's a yellowed letterhead dated November 1st, 1921, exactly 102 years and 5 days ago. It's actually what? 7 days. Yeah, 7 days. With a typed paragraph on the front side ending with a thought-provoking question. Is it conceivable that we shall break faith with those who die for us? What was he talking about? Over 100 years ago, my great-grandfather sat at a typewriter and contemplated the same question I ask myself on almost a daily basis. Surely other veterans struggle with the same or similar questions. Have I given enough? Is it time for me to leave the service? Do I have anything left in the tank? Am I living a life my fallen brothers and sisters would be proud of? Would they be proud of the man I've become? Have I earned this? Digging deeper, I asked myself, what exactly did he mean by breaking the faith with those who die? That's when I turned over the letter. On the flip side of his ponderings, my great-grandfather took the time to type the poem In Flanders Fields, written by a Canadian World War I veteran, John McCrae, which contains the same phrase within its powerful prose. In Flanders Field, the poppies blow, between the crosses row and row that make our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and we were loved, and now we lie in Flounders Field. Take up our quarrel with this foe. To you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep through poppies grow in Flanders Field. And there's another paragraph. I think I didn't know if you wanted me to go through, so I'll also read it. So since then, typewriters have been exchanged for laptops, but while technology and world around us constantly change, the question remains the same. My great-grandfather toiled with the same questions veterans wrangle with today. They worry about coming home, connecting with family, living a normal life, and leaving the uniform and the military lifestyle behind. They do all these things with the memory of their battle buddies on their minds. As I approach the twilight of my own career, I wrestle with these same thoughts, especially after a recent implosion of Afghanistan and the subsequent suffering and moral injury caused by foreign policy decisions, something our Vietnam veterans have carried for over half a century now. As humans, we often learn and internalize through stories. Stories build empathy. Empathy bridges understanding. So today, I'd like to take a few minutes to tell a story about my journey in the military and why it matters in your world of business in days prior to Vietnam, as we all reflect to celebrate who have served in uniform. So I continue on like we're 4 hours into it. I think you've told your story. That these, I wish you could have kept these business owners there to hear the same things that you've shared with us over the past, couple episodes.
Sure.
And they're powerful words. And are you sure you're writing this stuff? I'm giving you a hard time now.
No, it's
I'm giving you a hard time.
It's easier sometimes behind a laptop screen than in a live podcast. But I truly mean it, and that's it, right? We try to live a life that honors those who have gone before us, and for those that know the movie Saving Private Ryan, there's the scene of Tom Hanks at the bridge talking to Private Ryan, and he says, "Earn this," right? And I think every veteran feels that to their bones. For those that have served with people who have given the ultimate sacrifice, we constantly ask ourselves that same question, right? Like that's the ghost of Christmas past. They keep coming back, right? Like it's just for those who have served and have sacrificed for this country, freedom has a flavor that those that have never served don't have the opportunity to taste. And it's just, Veterans Day should be something special to veterans and to their families, because they have lived that life of sacrifice that have facilitated what our country is and what it's become. And it has to be maintained. And the veterans in our country have to be celebrated, because if we don't, like General George Washington once said, a nation is judged by how it treats its veterans, right? And I don't want to end with a dark cloud. I know we're gonna talk about some other stuff before you close out, but Columbus, Ohio canceled its Veterans Day parade this year. Milvets said they couldn't facilitate it because there wasn't enough corporate sponsorship, and due to COVID and other varying reasons, where people were teleworking, that the turnout for a Veterans Day parade was just not something that they thought was sustainable. And so we are not having a Veterans Day in Columbus, Ohio this year, which is something that very routinely, aside from the 2020 pandemic, has happened since 1919. The rock ceremony at Ohio State we carried out yesterday in true form, and it's happened persistently even through the pandemic for 104 years. But we are not having a Veterans Day in Columbus.
I feel like we should talk off the air, but I think we should next year shove that up the city of Columbus's ass and change that. You have to change that. I mean, you're in a different spot, but like we'll talk about like what that's just ties into everything you've talked about before. Like this is we got to talk about that off camera.
Sure,
let's do that. That's I didn't know that, and I'm gonna say some awful shit that I don't want to be on camera. But that like I feel like, but I'm gonna say I think we can. Mike is gonna be part of this, but I think we can change that. That's just super disappointing. So I could talk to you forever, but we have to keep moving on with what we do, and I get it. But I could talk to you for hours and hours, and I always do. And the reason I can talk to you hours and hours on camera is like there's some quick conversations we had on the deck, and then over the phone that I want you to know that you're making a huge impact. And like I said before, I say this selfishly, like I'm glad that life put you in the path. The whales pushed you in my path. I couldn't be more thankful to have you in my life. I want you to understand that. So tonight's kind of unique about the veteran we're going to honor tonight. It's someone who served under you, that you have a personal relationship with, and deals with what, in my mind, I want to say this because I can, but it deals with what's wrong with suicide and what's going on. So the veteran we're going to honor tonight, Mike had actually asked me to honor this person, and of course, if he asked me to honor him, I'm going to do it. And when I went into my Google search and looked at it, I'd actually looked up Donovan before, and I didn't continue to go down the road because I didn't find enough about his life. So tonight that's going to change, right?
Yeah,
it's going to change. So it's like it changed. I changed because I did something which is completely crazy, which I do. I get invested in like the person that is that we're honoring tonight. Like a lot of people think it's something we just talk about, but I spend the most time preparing for this podcast on that, and it's the hardest part because.
But it's an important aspect.
Oh, it's 100%. I mean, it's
great.
It's what this ordinance is about. So like, it's just crazy. So before we honor him, I think I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to read what I showed you. I'm going to read a post that he wrote July 25th, 2012.
Yep.
So a little bit before he took his life. And
we were still deployed. We were overseas. We were about a month and a half from coming home when that Facebook post.
At the time, company commander for him, right? You were company commander?
Correct.
All right. So, and you hadn't read this until I showed you, right? Or did you? So, yeah, this is July 25th, 2012. Donovan took his life, and on, not too long after that, March 7th, 2013. So he wrote, if I am to die this day, know this: I have sacrificed my life for my brothers. I die not for my blood, family, nor my country. I have forsaken both as they have forsaken me. I die for the brothers that have become my family. For them I've given my life gladly. For them I walk into the very gates of damnation itself. I fear not death, for I know what awaits me at the end of life, and I embrace it gladly. May my name be forgotten. May my face be erased from all living memory. Only my brothers shall remember me, and only they shall celebrate my life and my death. To the world I am another nameless soldier who has given my life to America. And that's from Donovan Batterson. And I got to tell you, wherever you're at, Donovan, like, that didn't happen. The last part's not happening, right? It's not. Your name will not be forgotten. Your name will not be erased from your brothers and from the world. And that mindset is huge. About, if you haven't read that, that's 6 months prior to him taking his own life, and Mike can probably share, he took his life in a pretty violent way. So tonight we're going to honor one of your fellow paratroopers, U.S. Army Specialist Donovan Tyree Batterson, 21 years old. Donovan took his life on March 7th, 2013 in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Donovan was born on February 26, 1992 in Stockton, California. Donovan joined the United States Army after graduating from Lodi High School in Lodi, California in 2010. At the time of his death, Donovan was an infantryman with the 1st Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 4th Battalion Combat Team, 82nd Airborne Division. During his service, Donovan deployed to Afghanistan for 8 months in support of the global war on terrorism. Donovan's awards and decorations include the Purple Heart, the Army Commendation Medal, the Army Achievement Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, the Army Service Ribbon, the NATO Medal, the Combat Infantry Badge, and the Parachutist Badge. Donovan is survived by his brother Anthony, Uncle David, Aunt Terry, and other family members. And again, if you or someone is struggling with suicide, absolutely need to call the Veterans Crisis Hotline at 1-800-273-8255, or you can dial 988 and press 1. You can also chat now at veteranscrisishotline.net/chat. So anything you want to add about that? I feel like about that young man.
Yeah,
Can you bring up thanks, John. Thanks, Josh. Bring that back up.
I mean, Donovan was someone that was extremely apprehensive about deploying. He and I together ended up in the battalion commander's office before we deployed because he didn't necessarily want to deploy. He wasn't a conscientious objector. His concern with deploying was letting other people in his unit down because of perhaps things that he did that might cause other people harm. He had a warrior's heart and was a person that cared about the people to his left and right. The picture of him taking a knee right there, looking upward into the sky with the mine detector, tied to something that you talked about earlier with something from my speech about picking up pieces of an elder of mine. So when I talk about the worst day of my life, Donovan, after expressing concern for harming other people because of mistakes he might make and not wanting to deploy, he still deployed. He made the decision to get on the plane. He, like all of us, could have opted out, right? After we lost Sam Watson and Ben Neal, we also had a second mass cal the day of April 25th, 2012, which included the loss of a platoon leader's leg, Reed Albano. Donovan was the mine detector that day in the alleyway. And I don't think that specific incident was due to his oversight. I think there was some other things at play with regards to how the enemy had laid out the alleyway in a way that made it extremely complex for anybody to find what was waiting for us. But I think he blamed himself for that specific incident. He was evacuated that day, like other people, due to the concussion that he sustained from being in the alleyway. But after going through concussion protocol, came back to us. The picture of him on a knee with the mine detector is about a month later when Gordon, the elder that I talked about in the article, was doing a resupply mission and stepped on a pressure plate IED himself and was blown into a number of different pieces. And when some of the Afghan army people said, the old man is gone, he's peace, which was the way that it was explained to me through the interpreter, Dave, I said, he's not gone, he's just not in one piece. And we have an obligation to bring him home to his family because he was the local police commander that had allied with me for this specific area in Afghanistan. Someone had to take lead on helping me pick up pieces of that elder. So I handed my M4, right or wrong, to Dave, my interpreter, who carried my weapon for me. So I put rubber gloves on and pick pieces up of Ghulam Dastagir and bring him home to his family. Donovan was the mine detector. So he took lead, moving me through the uncleared open field with Overwatch established because we didn't know what was on the other side at the time because the Afghans had taken some contact, and that's Donovan taking a break as he's leading me through the uncleared field to pick up pieces of the elder so that I could bring him home to his family. So think about the incredible amount of pressure that young man was under in that photo. He turned 21 after we got home, so he's 20 years old in that picture. That is a 20-year-old young man who has already endured a lot from the significant event that we went through in April. And I love him for that picture because I love him for the amount of bravery that he showed that day, the amount of protection that he provided me, the amount of willingness of risk that he took that day to be on point, to scan the area for threats and to keep me safe, to be able to bring and repatriate that Afghan commander back to his family. Never leaving a fallen comrade is part of both the warrior and the Ranger creed, and he lived that day. And ultimately, that and the event in April are likely contributing factors to deciding to take his own life. I think, as you and I described, there were other variables at play, but he is a young man that I loved, still love, and appreciate for what he did for us on that deployment And it's extremely traumatic and sad the way that he took his own life. And I think there's a number of different variables to include the R4 Gen cycle that we lived through at the time, where almost virtually his entire chain of command was stripped from him, not in a malicious way, but just in the sense of all of us changed out because we had other duties and responsibilities to move on to based on mission requirements at the time. But Donovan was an incredible young man who served his country honorably and unfortunately ended up taking his own life. But it doesn't take away from the amount of love that I have for him. And I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts about him today and just honor his service and what he did for us and for Battle Company and for the 508th and the 82nd during his time in uniform.
Yeah, and I don't know if that picture it shows justice, but you can look him up and search it and see that picture. And what I thought about him, he's a giant, man. In that picture, it's a picture of he's a fucking giant. Yeah. That's the way to look at it. That's a picture. Like if you zoom in on it, it's like you can see it's a guy. Like I wasn't there. And the crazy thing about everything with Ports of Patriots when we talk is like we're friends. We talk about that. That's not none of this is scripted. That's what the funniest thing about this. Some people, whatever, but that picture, like pull it up in full definition, look at it. He's a giant among men in that picture, and dude, he's a damn good looking paratrooper, man. I got to tell you, isn't it? So, thank you for leading me down the path with him. It went a little bit the way we didn't want it to go, but I'm super proud to be able to honor Donovan and.
Thank you for the opportunity.
He's but like we said before, is if you feel like you did before, there's a lot of things that are going like again, and we'll hit it one more time. Is you definitely need to call the Veterans Crisis Hotline 988 or 1-800-273. I haven't got it memorized yet anymore. Many times I've said it, but the best way now is just on 988 press 1. It's the best way to do it. Yeah. If you're into texting now or chatting, Veterans Crisis Line.net. /chat. And again, thank you for allowing me to have the opportunity to continue the road down with him, because I did actually think about honoring him because he's a paratrooper, and the thing I'll add about that is like he made a bad choice, and we've said that before. It's not the best choice for a lot of other people, but the one thing that we can't do is people that are their family or other service members is because they made a bad choice does not honor the person who they are, right? And he deserves to be honored. I'm glad you were able to come on tonight to honor him. Yeah, I mean that's probably the most important thing we can do. So we've covered Veterans Day, right?
Yep. The
next step is we unfortunately, against everything in my heart and mind, it's now time to say it's almost time. We're how many hours away?
Does this taste like wax?
What's it called? So we have to thank. This is the second time we've had the crayon. It's the happy birthday is actually spelled correctly this time. We don't have to do any modifications. It's a private joke that amongst everybody down here before. But in all honesty and with all love in my heart, not really. Happy birthday to all the Marines tomorrow. I can't wait for it to be over so we can move on to Veterans Day. But happy birthday to the Marine Corps. How many years is it, Joe?
200. What?
Oh, we've
295?
No, 244, I think. Something like that, right? They don't even know. They just wanted to tell you about it. But happy birthday to the Marine Corps. Happy birthday to our brothers and sisters. The few, the proud. We'll keep the tradition on. Next year it'll be a green crayon. Joe can't wait to eat and trying to take a bite of it. But again, all joking aside, huge weekend. I just want to say before is definitely, like I said before, if you're a veteran, thank you for your service. And one of the things I want to say, like this happened to me this week, is what a veteran is. Like I can't believe we have to like post what a veteran is. So a veteran isn't Mike, who's a decorated Ranger, saw combat. It is a sorry, it is a person who that is a person that served 4 years. It did their initial term. That's what a veteran is. Like, you don't have to be a veteran. If you're a veteran, you don't have to look at Mike and all the medals and everything he has and put yourself up against that person because you are a veteran. Like how I've said this before, any person that's raised their right hand, took the oath, and served honorably, you're a veteran. So this is a weekend to celebrate you, to celebrate your sacrifice, and most importantly, to what I really believe is to celebrate our families that really sacrifice, right? The spouses, the children. It's a time to really look at veterans, and if you're a veteran, I will challenge you this weekend to actually thank your spouse, thank your children, share this experience with them. It's important, and happy Veterans Day. And again, Mike, thank you for coming on. It means the world to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't tell you how good I feel to be across from a true hero. You're a hero of mine, and a friend and a brother.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity, and for the veterans out there listening, know that your service matters. Your service is admirable, and it's something you should be proud of. And if you ever find yourself in a dark place, please reach out. Please find the help you need. Call the crisis hotline. Call us. Call Portsmouth Patriots. Do whatever it is you need to do to find a brother or sister that you should know, knows you, loves you, recognizes you for who you are, and accepts you for the patriot that you are, for your service. It's admirable, and we honor you today and this weekend, and you and the sacrifice of your family is greatly appreciated.
And so we'll end it with a couple quotes real quick. But the first one's from Thien Mars, Return of the Warrior, the Toltec teachings. No man is born a warrior, nor is he born a reasoning being. We choose to become either one or the other. In order to become a warrior, one must be prepared to take one's chances and fight for one's freedom. There's no other way. One cannot become a warrior simply by wishing to do so. To become a warrior is to struggle of a lifetime. And, it's so easy to grab quotes to deal with the Ranger Regiment. But the last one is that we'll go into is more of a self-help one. And it's what I've added in since post-Saw, right? Yeah. So this is from Ernest Kurtz and Catherine Ketchum. Deny our errors is to deny ourselves. For to be human is to be imperfect. Somehow error-prone. To be human is to ask unanswerable questions, but to persist in asking them, to be broken and ache for wholeness, to hurt, and to try to find a way to healing through the hurt. Spiritually accepts that if a thing is worth doing, it is worth doing badly. So, again, thank you, Mike. Thank you for ending episode 4. I'm super excited. 3 weeks, we're going to have the driving force behind the Kelvington family. Meg is going to be on.
Yep.
I can't wait to have her on. So if you aren't ready for this, you need to be. I can't wait to have Meg here in 3 weeks. So it'll be great. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Happy birthday to the Marine Corps.
Right,
that just pains me. Happy Veterans Day. And we'll see you all in 3 weeks.
Go Bucks.